So we're going live. Are we live? This is the bit of the stream I hate because I don't know whether it's actually working. Somebody give me a shout to show that it's working. And we're working, I think. Except I've got a terrible delay. Thank you one and all for joining me. I'm your TechTechPotato in Cutress. Bit of a different background today. I'm actually moving around my office. As you can see behind me, I've got a wonderful little micro Amari system that's super thin. It's got a 5950X and a RTX 3090 in it. And the other side of me is a dual-core Jaguar that might be running some Crysis. Perfect. And I think there's a nice 30-second delay to the stream. Fabulous. So I've been wanting to do this for a while. It's I know live stream always gives me anxiety, so we'll see how this goes. But as you may have known, lots of stuff's happened over the past month. We've had CES at the beginning of January. We had a lot of announcements from AMD and Intel, and that's essentially what I'm going to be focusing on today. I managed to have interviews with both CEO Dr. Lisa Su and Intel CEO Bob Swan, as well as some insight into Pat Gelsinger, who's coming. So yeah, let's get straight into the news. Let me see if I can manage OBS in a quick way. So first up, let's start with AMD's CES announcements, and we're going to go straight into my articles at Anantech, just because that's the easiest way to pull them from. And the first thing that AMD launched in January is Ryzen 5000 Mobile. These chips called Cezanne, they're about 10.9 billion transistors, 180 square millimeters, and this is the upgrade to Renoir. This is the new CPU that's going in all the upcoming laptops, and laptops like this. This is the ROG Flow X13. This is the fresh sample. Ooh, yep, I have done a Linus already. Dropped it. Here we go. Yeah, really nice 5980 HS 35-watt system with a GTX 1650 in it. That kind of seems a bit unbalanced to me, but it's a really nice premium system. I just realized that I didn't show the laptop on the full screen. Sorry, I'll do that again and after when we get to the review. But Ryzen 5000 Mobile, 8 units of 8 cores of Zen 3, 8 units of Vega. So what AMD has done here is, in order to be faster time to market, they're chopping and changing their mobile APUs so they can pick and choose the CPU or the GPU aspect. In this case, rather than having an upgrade on the CPU and the GPU at once, we just had an upgrade on the CPU. So instead of RDNA 2, we still have another year of Vega, basically. This is 8 units of Vega. We're going up from 1750 megahertz to 2100 megahertz. So small bump there, and then Zen 2 goes to Zen 3. We've got a unified CCX structure and also double L3 cache, and that actually helps quite a lot. Well, AMD's big thing is L3 cache is great for gaming, right? So here we have the announcement. I'll go into the review in a second. But yeah, Ryzen 5980 HS, and this is the lineup. So as you probably all know, Ryzen Mobile, or any mobile chips really, are split between the 15-watt U series and the 45-watt H series. And what AMD has done is they've taken the 45-watt H series, they still got the H processors, but now they have the HS, which they introduced last generation with Renoir, that's got 35 watts, and the HX, which is the 45 watts plus overclockable. And they come in a range of speeds and feeds. The base chip has 8 cores, 16 threads, and that's what we're going to see mostly. And then, base frequencies around 3 gigahertz, turbos up to 4.8. And the one that's in this flow is this one here, which does go up to 4800 with a 35-watt TDP. And, some interesting power things that go on that we can go over when I go over the review. But the idea is that AMD does the HS for the ultra portables, like the ROG Flow, and then they do the HX for the desktop replacement parts. And then we go on to the U series. These are the 15-watt parts. Now AMD's done something a little bit different here. So we do have the upgrade to Cezanne. So we do have some chips with Zen 3. This is the 5800U, the 5600U, and the 5400U. 5400U is not noticed here because 5400U is going to be for some OEMs to do some of the upgrade path. So you notice the 5.8, 5.6, 5.4, they're all even. The 5.7, 5.5, 5.3 actually are still the old Zen 2 Renoir. This is technically called Lucien because they have done some minor upgrades to it. They've got the improved frequency upgrades on the GPU, like I mentioned. There's also CPPC, which is the turbo and preferred core, and some additional voltage selection enhancements to help lower the power. And AMD promoting 150 mobile systems with Ryzen 5000 with Cezanne. Starting February, so were we February 3rd now, or are we still in March 2020? And yeah, lots of systems becoming available, becoming pre-order on Newegg. I think I saw something like the ROG Float for 1500, or maybe it was definitely a Ryzen 5000 system. But as I said, we've reviewed this already. Between the announcement and today, we've reviewed Cezanne. This is what the APU looks like inside. They're actually using liquid metal with this sort of silicone wrapper to make sure the liquid metal doesn't get on these capacitors here, and then foam around the outside, which is a little bit weird. And you can see the Ryzen 9 on the side. And in this review, I recap what exactly Renoir is. And there's Lisa with a chip. I managed to get that picture from the live stream. You've seen this table before showing what chip we have in the system. And this is a CPU Z window, and that worked perfectly fine. See, it's A0 silicon, ready to go, 16 megs of L3. And then, talk over some of the platforms here. If you really want code names for AMD, I did a very handy table in this review for you to check. Pollock is still the odd one out here, but this is going from Zen all the way up, and you can see Matisse, Vermeer, which is the desktop Ryzen 5000. We've got Genesis Peak, which is next generation Threadripper. Don't know when that's coming out. And then Milan, which is Zen 3 Epic. That's coming out March, AMD said. And then Genoa, 4th gen, Zen 4 probably. And this is the notebook. This is what it looks like inside. It's a really nice, handy system. Unfortunately, I didn't really get to test as much of the system as I did the CPU. And then you can buy some external graphics. And some people have done videos in it where you have two sets of graphics in the laptop. So it's the integrated and the GTX 1650. And then you buy something like this, which has up to an RTX 3080 in it, I believe. So a system with 3 GPUs. Now, this system had 2 power options, and basically which affected the turbo time. So 120 seconds at 42 watts, and then down to 35, or you do 6 seconds at 42 watts, then down to 15. Interesting stuff. And then, this is a comparison of the systems that we've done. Ryzen 5000 Mobile, it's out. It's better than Renoir. Systems to come, and we'll cover the topic about AMD's high demand as to why this is getting priority, perhaps over some of the desktop chips that people are wanting. And sorry, I've been talking a lot and I've been ignoring the chat. Sorry. Thanks, Dan, for the $4. That's nice coffee. Unfortunately, because it's 10:40 p.m. at night, I've only got water for now. But yeah, it's do the processors have different power configs available like NVIDIA mobile GPUs? All AMD processors have a very TDP range. They don't often promote it, and it's very hard to tell whether a system uses it until you actually do proper power measurements. And much like Intel systems, chances are you can't really tell the performance just by what processor it has in it. That will just tell you the cores and the rough frequency. It's not until you actually test the system where you get a sense of the turbo performance. So Vignesh asks, the HS chips are binned. Sorry, I almost say banned. Are binned, aren't they? So they perform similarly, even though they're down 10 watts in TDP. Yeah, it's a measure of this sort of how we go from turbo time to sustained. After the turbo time, after this 42 watt mode on the HS chips is finished with their H chips, I assume it's somewhere near 54. Then you go down to the sustained, where you'll go back to your TDP value, whether that's 35 or 45 watts. And it won't be at the base frequency, it'll be an opportunistic frequency as high as it can go in relation to thermals, in relation to fan speed. A lot of that is configured at the OEM level. So you might see a company like MSI, for example, being aggressive and accepting that you can have a hotter system, whereas you might have something like an XMG that will go even beyond that, or you might have a system that's focused incredibly on silence and fan noise, and they will purposely put the CDP down after that turbo time. I mean, this is what the silence section of this is. Next up on AMD's announcement list is EPYC Milan. So Zen 3 coming to EPYC. If you're wondering why you can't get hold of any Ryzen 5000 CPUs right now, it's probably because they're making these. AMD's always said, or always given the impression, that EPYC's going to be the big cash cow for the company as they ramp up in enterprise, and enterprise is going to be a big focus for the year. So that's going to be Zen 3, Zen 3 with EPYC, and codename Milan. They showed off here this weather research and forecast model, 2 Xeon Gold 6258Rs. One of those, something like that. Oh no, that's a 16 core. Anyway, 2 of those versus 2 of the Milan 28 core versus 32 core. And they showed, so it says 68% here. AMD kind of fudged the numbers here. 68% here is just in single socket. When you actually go through the presentation on a dual socket, it was only 46%. We don't know the price yet, so any sort of TCO, we can't really get a grip of that until they actually launch it, which should be, March. Really looking forward to testing this, just because it's a system, 8-channel memory that needs that through the compute can potentially do a lot. The question is, how much market share will they get? AMD has said they reached 10% server market share last year. Intel just came out saying they have 92% market share, though they group the data center market differently. The total addressable market for Intel is a bit bigger because they include other sort of server markets within that as well. AMD hasn't set a new goal, say like a 15 or a 20% market share, just because they say they're focusing more on customers. But we'll see how that goes. Now, this is an interesting one. I hope you all got a chance to see the video that was on the channel a few days ago. Threadripper Pro coming to consumers. This is Threadripper Pro is a bad name. It's more like Workstation EPYC. If you take an EPYC system, an EPYC CPU, instead of 225 watts or 240 watts, you make it 280 watts, and then you reduce the maximum memory by half. That's Threadripper Pro. In order to go from Threadripper to Threadripper Pro, you have to double the PCIe lanes. You have to... I'm blanking here now. Quad channel to 8 channel. Then you also have to add in all the the professional elements. So there's all that jazz. It's more like a workstation EPYC. There are 64 core, 32 core, 16 core. We'll get to those in a second, but there'll be 3 motherboards for this on the WRX 80 chipset. And so Asus Gigabyte Supermicro, and I by chance got hands-on with the Asus Pro, literally an OEM, actually the one that built that system there, Armari, was getting a sample in so they can build their future workstations. And I said, can I borrow it for 24 hours? And they said, sure. So this is why I managed to get some photos of it, showing 7 PCIe 4x16 slots, all reinforced. The socket, if you're wondering why it's rotated like that, it's because you have the airflow, so you can direct the airflow from the 24 pin all the way through past the VRMs out of the back. It's really surprising that actually most systems don't have this, because you'd think even in a desktop system it'd be better laid out this way. You do get some clash with the memory slots, but this is an extended ATX, and there's 3M2, two U.2s, and there's two 10 gig on the back. And there's a Threadripper Pro chip. I wasn't able to test that chip in that board because that chip's for a Lenovo system that I'm also testing right now. You can't actually, you can just, it's that one there. That still needs to be tested. This board has, I didn't take the plastic off because it's not my board. I hope you all understand that. But for reinforcement, because it's a massive board and you can just imagine 4 big dual slot GPUs in. This is the VRM heatsink. It weighs 300 grams, which to our American friends is 0.6 of a pound. The whole system weighed about 5.5 kilos. It was about 12 pounds. That's the motherboard and the box, but the box was basically empty. 16 phase VRM, two 12-volt CPU connectors, 8-pin CPU connectors. I did think there was 3 on because there's another one here. But I've since been told that that's actually for extra PCIe power. There's another 2 PCIe, 6-pin PCIe there as well. You know, just in case you need all the power for the PCIe. There is a fan on the chipset because this is basically the X570 chipset and the TRX40 chipset. It's essentially got the same number. I think between them they're CG 30, 89, 90, and 91. But this one is built newer. Lots of interesting stuff. SATA and then back ports. Was it 9 or 8 USB 3.2 Gen 2 10 gig, and then 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 20 gig, and then 2 10 gig RJ45 10G base T ports. It's quite a hefty system. I've asked ASUS to send me one, I've asked Gigabyte to send me theirs, and I've asked Supermicro to send me theirs, so I should be on the ball for all of them. And these are the Threadripper Pro CPUs. The top one, 64 cores, 5490. The price, I did ask if they could make it $3,995. No dice. People who follow me regularly will know that when Threadripper the 3990 came out, I made AMD change the price to $39.90, so we have $1 per X. It's a little thing that I'm proud of. You will notice here that the chiplets change. So this actually changes the L3 cache. You have 128 meg of L3, 256 meg of L3 on the 64 core, 128 meg of L3 on the 32 core, and then 64 meg of L3, and then 64 meg of L3. Now, this bottom one, this 3945WX 12 core, doesn't have a price associated with it because we're on the understanding that it's going to be an OEM, special OEM only part for whatever reason. But yeah, looking forward to this platform, looking forward to this system, though based on recent high demand on AMD stuff, good luck getting one. Good luck finding one. I guess if these are expensive, then we'll see. There might not be that much demand for them. And that in a nutshell is basically AMD at CES. Threadripper Pro, Ryzen Mobile 5000, and some Milan. So just want to cover up some questions. The board is worth more than most people's entire setup, yes. So the board pricing, some European retailers have said about 900 euros, 1,000 euros. The OEM that lent it to me, Omari, said it's going to be around that price as well. I'm still on the fence because the motherboard for the W3175X was $1,500 from ASUS. And they've just released a Z590 model that's $1,800. So the fact this is only 1,000, I guess you don't have to do overclocking on it, so they don't have to budget that in. But it is a professional grade system. I mean, 1,000 is probably a good price for a board for this sort of chip. Though if you're paying 1,000, you really want at least 32 core. if not the 64 core. The reason why these are called Threadripper Pro and not Workstation Epic is because AMD has made inroads into the rendering industry, into the design industry, and they're all built up on Threadripper, normal standard Threadrippers, and they wanted something more with more channels of memory, more PCIe lanes. So rather than try and navigate them to the Epic line, which is perhaps a bit more varied, they just Threadripper Pro, here you go. And Lenovo, when they made the P620 Threadripper Pro systems, they sold out, and they just had to make more. Do the Pro chips vendor lock like Epic? You mean, are they restricted just to the specific chipsets? Yes, I believe that's true. So these chips will only work in the ASUS, the Gigabyte, and the Supermicro. Then if you get a Lenovo system, perhaps in the Lenovo. If you mean if the chip from Lenovo will only work in Lenovo, I don't want to think that that's the case. Let's see questions. Yeah, as Patrick from Serve the Home put it, Wepic. I think Wepic's a better name, to be honest. Are those turbo rates higher than M1? I think that was we're on the Cezanne. Does the M1 even turbo in a similar way? I believe the M1 does turbo in a similar way. Again, with those systems, because they're laptops, they're more OEM configured. So a configuration in a laptop for a chip like Ryzen Mobile would be different from when it's in a mini PC or when it's thermally unconstrained. So please talk about the rumors about Intel moving most of their CPU production to TSMC. Got that in my to-do talking list later. I think we'll cover that. And then people saying Warhol is Ryzen 6000 series. Don't know. They haven't officially announced that yet. So my position on leaks is that leaks are leaks. Believe them if you want. I prefer much to get my information from my primary sources. And yeah, I won't believe it unless I publish it, or I can confirm and I can publish it. Hi Ian, do you think AMD will finally go to RDNA for next gen mobile, or at this point is it Vega till DDR5? Truth be told, AMD in high demand right now means that they're going to be focusing on the high margin products, and that's most likely going to be enterprise and commercial. So I think we might have to wait a lot longer for a new mobile chip to come out, because if a mobile APU to come out, whether it's in laptops or whether it's in mini PCs, just because AMD would much rather send that silicon into Epics and sell those. It's a revenue play. Intel did the same thing 2 years ago when they were in high demand, though I think we'll catch up on that as well. Is the fan directly over the chipset or is it offset? I don't think I remember, actually. I remember there being a pad on the bottom. I didn't take a picture of the bottom. I did take the heatsink off, obviously, to get this picture. There was a pad. It wasn't pasted or anything. I did see a Rick Astley question, though I think I've lost it. Rick Astley in the background. Yes. When I'm in my normal setup, I do have this vinyl of Rick Astley. I have a video on this on the channel, which you can read. Watch. I write too much. Read. When is the collab video with Debar happening? Not anytime soon. Roman and I have had disagreements over the past years. So that's AMD. A lot of people criticized AMD's presentation at CES for being more talking about associations with partners rather than products for end users, and people saying it's the worst presentation ever. I wouldn't sit through this ever, and words like that. I disagree with that. AMD's presentation was a keynote at CES. Keynotes have a much higher billing than, say, Intel's presentation, which wasn't an official keynote by CES. AMD, with those presentations, their goal is to showcase showcase their company to potential relationship development. I mean, so CES is a trade show. Trade shows are different from public shows. Now, I know CES used to mean consumer electronics shows, so they've got to speak about consumer parts. But that doesn't mean the show is for the consumer. The show is for the tech press. The official CES keynotes are technically behind a paywall that you have to pay if you're not a member of the press. If you're a member of the trade, you have to pay. If you're a member of public, they probably won't even let you sign in and pay your money. The only reason that AMD made their presentation public is because they put in the footwork to enable, in order to enable that. So, as the presentation, AMD's presentation isn't aimed at you or me. It's aimed at the OEM partners that it works with. It's aimed with the OEM partners it doesn't work with, and it's aimed with the system integrators that it sells to. So that's why we saw, Microsoft on stage. It's virtual, so by video link. We saw Microsoft there. We saw Oracle there. And they're bigging up the wins that they've made with their parts. They're saying, look, these massive companies that have millions and millions of servers and millions of clients are working with us because they feel that we have the right trajectory for our platforms, and we want you to work with us too. Now, they managed to loop in the CEOs of those companies. Do you remember when AMD was doing those sorts of CES and Computex presentations where they could only get, VP of products because they weren't being very competitive? That's in the position where they are. So when somebody turns around and says, well, AMD, you didn't announce a lot of products like you have in previous, and you were just, helping yourself get off on your own wins. That's the goal of the presentation. The goal of the presentation isn't for you. It isn't for me. It showcased new stuff, sure. But AMD literally announced 5 platforms in Q1. So Ryzen 5000, Ryzen 5000 for mobile, they're doing the production on that. You've got Radeon RX 6000 cards. You've got the 2 consoles, and they're ramping up a Pink Milan. To announce more in Q1 that you're probably not going to get until Q3, Q4, that's just bad. That would just be bad on AMD because in the event that they were unable to deliver. So all this rhetoric about AMD's presentation not being for consumers, not for you. Sorry, my rant. Thanks to Nori SS for the $5. That was the collab with DeBauer comment. I did see that come out. So, isn't it that also AMD just paying the price for getting OEM support lately? Well, I mean, so companies like Microsoft and Oracle, they perhaps hesitant to get in on first generation EPYC. Then, they saw second generation EPYC. And they built up and they slowly got more comfortable, and now it's third generation. They've got all the platforms they want to transfer over. They're optimizing for it. AMD is record revenues. They're hiring hand over fist to get experts to help these OEMs. That's the sort of thing that happens. AMD. We'll come back to AMD when we talk about Lisa Su. For now, let's go on to Intel, because I realize we've just spent a whole hour on AMD. Intel had lots of announcements, and I'll blast through them quickly because some of them are relatively straightforward. This one isn't, though. This is Intel's new H35 series quad-core Tiger Lake. So remember when I said that U series is typically 15 watts and H series is 45? What Intel has done here is they've taken the Tiger Lake U series and boosted it to 35 watts. So it's a U35, essentially. But because it's 35, they're calling it H, even though it's U. And the reason why it's U is because it's 4-core, not 8-core. Their Tiger Lake H silicon, which is due to come out later this year, is 8-core. But this is 4-core. So if you want a super high-frequency quad-core Tiger Lake system running at 35 watts rather than 15 watts. Now, technically, they did have 28-watt versions of Tiger Lake U, so this is only a few more watts over than that, just so they can get, base frequencies are up 300 megahertz, one-core turbo is up 200 megahertz, still with 96 XE GPU units. They're just 3 CPUs, and I think some of the big OEMs have already got this Core i7-113075H SE. I really don't like the fact that it's called H35. If it was called U35, I would agree with it, but marketing gonna market. Standard U series processor. They're introducing resizable bar as well across Tiger Lake, and I think it's also coming back to Ice Lake. So, yeah, and the goal is ultra portable gaming. Similar sort of systems to the Flow X13, except that this has got 8 cores, and this has got 4. Yeah, each 35. So now we go on to actually proper Tiger Lake 8 core. So we knew this was coming because Intel had said in their architecture day that the lead architect said that there'll be designs with double L3 cache, and the only way you can get that is through doubling the cores in this case. So it's going to be a new silicon product. We were expecting it to come out in Q3, but it seems it's going to come out in Q1. Intel says the processors will start production and ship in Q1, which likely means Q2. So 8 cores, 16 threads. Top variants will enable 5 GHz turbo frequencies on multiple cores. That's likely 1 and 2 core. 5 GHz, and then resizable bar. 20 lanes of PCIe Gen 4. Interesting to see Gen 4 in a mobile processor. AMD didn't do Gen 4 because they said, well, you only really need PCIe 3, plus it's also very power hungry. So it'll be interesting to see how Intel plays with the power there. When the H series comes out, what I think reviewers should be doing is checking to see what connection speed and bandwidth the discrete GPUs are connected at, because I bet a lot of them will be actually connected to PCIe 3 Gen 8 just for power reasons. So interesting to see. Though with storage, the top PCIe 4 SSDs now peak at 5 watts. That's the best power efficient PCIe 4 SSDs are 5 watts. The old PHYs on E18s went up to 7 or 8. 5 watts for an SSD is still a lot for a laptop, especially in these systems where they're going to take 1 or 2. Then I guess these are more sort of desktop replacements, so you're only going to get 40 minutes on battery if you're lucky anyway. So Intel confirms 10nm Ice Lake production has started. I found this a bit of a weird announcement. So we've been expecting 10nm server processors for 2+ years now, and typically the key partners are working with the silicon all the way from the first A0 silicon that comes out, and so somebody like Google will have early access to Intel's first silicon out of production, and then every iteration of silicon, Google and other CSPs, other hyperscalers will get access to the silicon, and they will help Intel debug the silicon. Just because they can roll out 100,000 systems quite easily, whereas Intel might only roll out 10,000. And they can also run their own workloads on it and begin to start optimizing their workloads for the new chip. And we know that 10nm Ice Lake has had delays. These delays are a function of the process not working, not achieving the right performance. Then you also have to hit the yield cost curve. So the cost of a wafer multiplied by a factor of the yield is basically your cost per chip. And if that's too high, you either need to reduce your cost per wafer down, or you need to increase the yield. And I think that's what Intel's been doing a lot recently. And it's now at the point where they're comfortable saying they're ready to launch this in Q1, and then a volume production has started. Though usually when they make an announcement for a server chip, say Skylake SP or Cascade Lake XP, Google and everybody else already had the silicon 6 months beforehand. So the fact that they're saying only production has only now started, rather than say 6 months ago, if they're going to launch in Q1, yeah, I think I say it here, it doesn't fit into the timeline of how Intel's processor production usually works. And technically, Bob Swan in our interview said that they're actually already generating revenue on this product, though that was later corrected post-interview, saying it was a misspeak. So on the other end of the scale, so those were the high core count Intel Xeons. This is the 10 nanometer Atom Jasper Lake, and also the IoT version Elkhart Lake. These are using 4-core Tremont Atom cores. Now, Tremont interests us because in the land of CPU design, what Intel have done is they've taken the standard 4-wide decoder and split it into 2 3-wide decoders, which means with the right mix of instructions, you can essentially decode twice as many instructions on the fly. One of the things that people point to as effective for Apple's M1 performance is the fact that it has 8 decoders, whereas Intel and AMD only have 4. Other people disagree and say that's not a bottleneck. But the fact that Intel are trying something here, they don't have a micro-op cache in Tremont, so having these 2 3-wide decoders is a big help in performance. Though the processors we saw because these are the same cores that we saw in Lakefield, weren't that performant. So we're waiting to see it come out into notebooks and mini PCs. DDR4 2933, UHD graphics. This is going to be also focused a lot in the education market. Intel's financials recently said that they're having bumper demand for their education processors because of the global situation and people working and studying from home, high demand for education processors. So here they put themselves favorably against AMD's Bulldozer CPU here and an old MediaTek Helios processor built on ARM. So waiting to get these in. Apparently, devices should be in market in Q1. I've been told Acer has the first one, though Acer says they're not. It's weird. We'll see. But I'm waiting for a Windows version. I was told Windows version was coming first, but most of these will probably be aimed at Chromebooks. And yeah, I guess one of the last announcements was Alder Lake. Actually, let me do Rocket Lake first. Here we go. So Intel said that Rocket Lake, its next-gen desktop processor, the 11th gen desktop processor, will be coming in Q1 launch. And the top of the line is the i9-11900K with 8 cores, despite the fact that the 10900K is 10 cores. Why is that? So you probably already know this, but I'll talk about it anyway. What they've done is they've taken the core in Ice Lake, and which is on 10 nanometer, and they've backported it. They've taken the same logical layout, and they've put it into a physical 14 nanometer design. That obviously makes the core bigger because you're going from 10 to 14. That increases delay lines, and you have to manage those and additional power consumption that comes from that. And it turns out that the core is so big that in the die area for which they think is relevant for this product line, they can only fit 8 cores. Now, they could do a 10-core version. They would just have to make a bigger die, which, yield... it's on 14 nanometers, so yields are good. Price would probably be good. The downside, I'm under the impression the downside is going to be power. So we know that Ice Lake cores are power hungry, especially with the AVX512 unit and the additional AI extensions. Now we're moving to AVX512 on the desktop. That's going to consume a lot of power, and 8 cores of that. And this slide here says, up to 5.3 gigahertz turbo. 4.8 gigahertz all-core turbo, DDR4 3200, AV1 decode support. It's got Xe graphics, 20 CPU PCIe 4 lanes, new 500 series chipset. I'm betting these are going to come out with 125 watt TDPs. I think this was actually, it said 125 watt. But the PL2, as hopefully you can see here, let's see if I can bring that up, says 250 watts. So if you want Rocket Lake, plan your cooling appropriately. by the end of Q1, I'm expecting Q1 probably, maybe even first couple of weeks of Q2. We'll see when that comes out and how much of the stack. I mean, there's reports that they're refreshing the bottom of the stack by just renaming them. Nothing I can confirm, but lots of new motherboards as well. Now, as a follow-on from that, we have Alder Lake, which Intel promises will be coming later in the year in 2021. So we might only have 6 months between a desktop platform on Intel refresh. We've had these are LGA 1200. The one thing Intel didn't mention in this demo, which I don't think a lot of people picked up on, is that yes, here is a desktop system running Alder Lake, and they showed it booting into Windows, showing that the silicon is working. What they didn't say is whether the processor inside this system is a desktop processor or a mobile processor, because I bet you they're coming out with mobile first. Alder Lake is going to be it's Intel's hybrid architecture, so they're going to be pairing high-end cores with the Atom cores, and we're going to see some really interesting mix because hybrid architecture and Windows. The Windows on Snapdragon systems kind of manage it well, but Windows wasn't built for that sort of hybrid architecture, and I just wonder how well it's going to work, and whether on a desktop we'll even see the small cores active. Laptops, yes, fine. Desktops, I wonder if we'll just get 8+0 configurations, so 8 big cores, 0 little cores, so that way you can enable AVX512. Another thing with hybrid CPUs have a problem. You have to have both. Currently, you have to have both the big CPU and the little CPU share the same instruction set architecture. So if the small CPU doesn't support AVX512, you can't have it enabled on the big cores, because if an AVX512 instruction goes to a small core, then it just throws a segmentation error, a seg fault, or a signal error, and it might just crash the whole CPU. So if you don't take that into account, then you can't have different ISAs supported across different CPUs. So if Intel's fixed that problem and has been working with Microsoft on Windows to fix that problem, good. But the instruction booklet from Intel says that AVX512 is disabled anyway, so they haven't fixed it. We'll see. But Alder Lake, end of the year, does that mean you shouldn't go for a Rocket Lake system now? Like I say, I think they're going to do mobile first. I bet you it's 2022 when we'll see any desktop, and then it's a question of volume, how mature 10 nanometer will be at that point, and whether the system actually works. If you want a traditional Intel system that just works, Rocket Lake's going to be your way to go, as long as you don't mind the power consumption. Oh, I'm actually getting dry mouth, talking a lot. So I'm going to go through some questions in reverse order. I wonder how much future chiplet and advanced package CPUs need some bespoke work at the OS level. Most packaging right now is power is the main issue that you get at the OS that you have to deal with. So if you're dealing with so say these different CPU blocks, if you've got them in different chiplets, you also have to manage power across the chiplets and how that's distributed. And a lot of work AMD has done since Carrizo is on power detection and that sort of level. So that's a big part of it. Intel's packaging technology, things like HBM, but they've also got die-to-die Foveros. They've also got what's called ODI, which is omnidirectional interface. It's kind of like EMIB, but it means you can have sort of like a cantilevered. So if you imagine that, and you imagine a die that kind of hangs off the edge, just so it can get power TSVs through. That's ODI. That's a big part of the control there. At the OS level, so remember with when we had Broadwell with Crystalwell L4 eDRAM, that was fairly transparent to the OS. So if we had a HBM layer, that should be transparent. A Xeon Phi has MCDRAM, and that was transparent to the OS. So you just see it in the memory latency distribution. Let's see. This is not Linus Spend Tips. I do sometimes send a few things over to Linus saying, buy this. You should do a video on it. I think the last one he did was the Quad ATI 9800 Pro GPU, which he didn't give me a shout out in the video for. I did message him and he said I recorded it, but apparently it wasn't put in. Will you cover the launch of Intel Gracemont later this year? Yes. If you go back through AnandTech, I've done deep dive into Tremont, just without the performance numbers. We'll do the same thing with Gracemont as and when Intel decides to talk about it. Intel seems a lot more willing to do architecture days, to do tech days. We still want another manufacturing day. There's a lot of talk about IDF happening again, though not necessarily in the same format. I think the global situation has kind of put a stop to that for a little bit. That might spin up again over the next few years. Apparently, the new CEO Pat Gelsinger really, really liked IDF, so I'm putting my pins on that. I bought a Cascade system last August. Upgrading to Ice Lake probably isn't worth it, but Sapphire Rapids looks really nice. Do you think they'll really launch it as fast as announced? Probably not. I mean, they have to fulfill the Aurora demand first. Now, you could argue that's not a lot of CPUs, but we'll have to see how it rolls out. I think you've got a lot of time to wait, and a lot of when things are that far out, I don't much like speculating because more will come, more information will come. Have you done the math to get the price of 7nm wafers yet? Yeah, that was an article I promised a year ago that I just haven't sat down and done because I keep thinking I don't have enough information. And a lot of people keep telling me actually no, it's a bit more than that because my information is a few years out of date now. Though I still need to do it, and I promise I will. Please ping me again next year. I think that sounds terrible. Okay, let's go over. Okay, so another thing that Intel announced at CES is Z590 motherboards. These are the motherboards for Rocket Lake. So same LGA 1200 socket as Comet Lake, but for the new CPUs, some extra benefits. The big one being double bandwidth between the CPU and the chipset. So if you pair a Z590 with a Rocket Lake CPU, you now have a by 8 link to the chipset rather than a by 4 link, which means that if you have any high performance peripherals coming off of it, then there's less chance for a bottleneck. We're going up to DDR4 3200 with the system. Support for USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 native, so we'll see that. PCIe 4, 20 lanes. So a few of the Z490 boards already have PCIe 4 ready, and that will probably be activated through a BIOS. Bear in mind that those boards were made without having Rocket Lake chips on hand to verify, so your mileage may vary exactly there. Our recommendation is that if you want the best out of a Rocket Lake chip, if you buy one, then a Z590 board would be the best bet. I mean, that's usually our recommendation every chipset upgrade, though Z490 will happily accept you just be running at PCIe Gen 3. You still get the DDR4 3200, though. That shouldn't be an issue. Yeah, there's a DMI by 8 link. Still got 24 chipset PCIe 3 lanes, USB 3.2 Gen 2x2. There's a few other things here we don't quite know yet because we haven't been told. TDP of 6 watts, so there's not going to be any chipset fans here. Is support for Thunderbolt 4, though through an add-in for Intel's controller. Some of the motherboards have that. So this is the article that if you want to know anything about any of the motherboards, if you want a quick overview, we've actually gone through on AnandTech, we've gone through every single Z590 motherboard, thanks to our motherboard editor, Gavin Bronshaw. He does this big article every chipset launch where he just goes through every motherboard launched, gets as much information as he can, usually pictures pricing, full spec list, and if we can, power delivery. And he'll go through and he will do what we do call a visual inspection. It's basically how much can we tell you about this motherboard just from the pictures, especially if you're not au fait with how motherboards are made, how motherboards are built, what an audio codec is, and that sort of thing. So if you go simply say take a ASRock Z590 Pro 4, that's a board that doesn't roll off the tongue. But if we click here, you go straight to the page, you'll see this is an entry-level board. This is what it looks like. Black and silver printed PCB. You can, top PCIe is a by 16. You got a by 4, M.2 support, and Gavin's, it's brief because he has to go through 50 boards, and it's usually a rush to launch. But it's talking about how the integrated graphics is supported, older audio codec, and combination PS2 port, which is good. I like combination PS2 ports because if you want your keyboard to absolutely confirmed to get your delete or F2 into BIOS, PS2 does it. Because PS2 is an interrupt protocol and not a polling protocol. But yeah, this we've also got some of these pricing here, BioStar if you want BioStar, and as we review some of these, we'll add in the reviews as well. And then we've got some from Colorful EVGA. As soon as we get information on some of these, we'll add it in. Gavin's usually quite good at updating. Right, every morning, one of these things to do is update the pricing. And if there are any information on any new boards, he goes through. So if Gavin, follow him on Twitter. He's a funny lad, and he does great work for us. So many thanks to Gavin here. If you go to the last page, we've got kind of a summary here. So 10 gig Ethernet. These are all the boards with 10 gig Ethernet. These are the boards with 5 gig Ethernet. Most of them have 2.5. These are kind of like the unique boards that have a standout feature. So only 2 have more than 8 SATA ports, or 8 or more SATA ports, for example. So if you want a lot of SSD storage or hard drive storage, those are the 2 boards that you want to look at. Type A, lots of boards have Thunderbolt 4 through the Maple Ridge controller and BIOS flashbacks. This is also important. And yes, if you're looking at that price, $1,800, that's where we are with these Z590 motherboards. One thing with Z590 is a lot of people will be annoyed is that the pricing is ridiculous. The lowest price board, I want to say, is $180. Yeah, $189. Don't think there's one cheaper than that. $175, there we go. Do you remember, maybe 5-10 years ago, you could get a top-of-the-line motherboard for $170. Now you can't even get an entry level for $170. This is crazy. I mean, part of it is that these motherboard manufacturers are now going above and beyond. They know a lot more about designing motherboards that attract sales. A lot of people want gaming features. There's RGB, there's large controllers. Supporting PCIe 4 is more difficult. You require a lot tighter traces, which is a lot of more man hours, and you have to put money into actually the raw materials. And then you've got things like 2.5 gigabit Ethernet controllers. Sorry, excuse me, talking a lot again. And that all comes into it, and you will, that brings up the cost a lot. I mean, you remember back at, was it P35, Gigabyte would have multicolored motherboards, wouldn't care for styling. These motherboards now, they have better bundles as well. It's just all that sort of thing. Then Intel also do this bundling thing where if you buy the chipset plus the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet plus probably the Thunderbolt controller, then the vendor gets a discount rather than, say, going to Realtek for a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet controller. So that's all bundled in. So yeah, as we come through, we'll do these. And Antec, we've taken the decision, you may or may not agree, that while we've got motherboards coming in for Z590 for review, we're actually not going to review them until we get Rocket Lake in-house. That's because we think that because Rocket Lake has AVX512, there's a lot higher current density with Rocket Lake, so we wouldn't really be stressing the VRMs. Please let me know if you think that's a good idea or a bad idea. If you want to see the reviews before Rocket Lake comes out on Comet Lake. The thing is, I don't think it'll be worth it, because then we just have 2 reviews that don't get the right sort of bidding on with Google searches, because Google search is still such a large part of our traffic, and it'd just be more relevant if we put Rocket Lake in to begin with. So do let me know. Why does Intel not integrate 2.5 gigabit Ethernet and 10 gigabit Ethernet controllers into the chipset? You still need a physical layer chipset, otherwise you're running traces all the way through the board. So it's just, and plus you also make the power consumption of the chipset bigger, which means you might need a fan on the chipset, that sort of thing. X570 prices for AMD were at launch as well. Yes, and B550. Everything PC is going up. But then do you remember when, Pentium 2 systems from like Gateway cost $2,500? That sort of thing. Do you know your traffic telemetry? Are people interested in Z590? We find that people tend to be interested in specific boards. So they'll go see they'll see one like I don't know, Steel Legend. This is actually the board we've got in Steel Legend already. And they'll type into Google and they'll probably get our overview link as one of the first, and then we see that and we see good traffic from that. There's no deals in the UK, but Amazon US probably has a deal. Pre-order, or maybe you can already order it. So we actually like these overview articles just because we go through every single board on the market. So Google TSMC 70 nanometer wafer capacity. Do you think Intel Alder Lake desktop CPUs will have DMI4 PCIe4 connection to the chipset? That's a distinct probability, just because AMD's already there with PCIe4 to the chipset. In order to reach parity, they would have to. Though they could also take the other route and decide to just put more PCIe lanes on the CPU. Let's see. Okay, Z590, that's done. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the interviews. So over the course of CES, we were offered interviews with both Intel CEO Bob Swan and AMD CEO Dr. Lisa Su. Now, I've interviewed Lisa a few times. Bob, this was the first time. And it holds the record as the interview with the very quickly the least relevant out of any interview that I've done, because only a few days later they appointed a new CEO. So I still want to go through this. So when I say interview, technically a round table. Round table is different to interviews because it's usually a 4, 5, or 6-on-1 for a round table, whereas interviews are typically 1-on-1 or 2-on-1. So it was me and Paul Alcon from Tom's Hardware. There were also Hot Hardware, PC World, VentureBeat, and Patrick Moorhead. Those tend to be the usual people on these small round tables. What Bob did is he spent the first 15 minutes of our 30-minute roundtable with prepared remarks. Prepared remarks are usually something they do on financial calls, and Bob is a ex-CFO, so he went through, basically promoting the company, saying about everything. Not a lot new that we didn't already know. He did mention that Intel needs to be a more modern chip developer. They use the phrase IDM as integrated device manufacturer. What they really mean is kind of like a foundry, but just being a more complete solution to a foundry. Intel doesn't really have much of a foundry offering. Nobody else can really use Intel's processes because Intel's processes are secret IP to them, and they probably use a lot of custom software which can't really be ported outside to help others build their chips. So part of what I think Raj and Jim Keller and perhaps even Murthy Ranajichala, who we'll touch on in a bit, part of their roles, I think, was to try and move Intel to to make their fab offering more repeatable to external customers. That way they can keep the fabs going with volume. I think it will also help fund next generation product processes. So Bob, spoke about Tiger Lake, spoke about, so this was before the press conference, so we didn't know what was coming out, though he did mention Alder Lake. This is me with a wafer of Tiger Lake back at CES 2020. That's the one I actually run off with. And then we get to the Q&A. I'm going to skip the Q&A. Please go to AnandTech and read it and go through it. There's Roger with XC. I'm going to drill down to the main remarks they made, which is relevant. So at the time we did this, the big question hanging over us was, well, is Intel going to commit to its 7nm process and actually build out its fabs for its 7nm, as in invest in EV machines? Because 7nm is probably at least 18 months away from being relevant, they still have to build out scale, and 7nm is a bigger jump than 10 because of this added element of EUV. Now, EUV is probably only going to be 10% of the process. The rest of the other 90% is probably still going to be the same sort of machines that 10nm use, but they still have to make those orders at ASML today because ASML is currently has a year's worth of orders to fill. So ASML is running flat out and they're at peak speed. And yeah, if you order one today, you won't get it until middle of next year. That's basically what that is. So Bob saying that Intel is keeping the fabs was key, because that's basically saying, yes, we've got confidence in our technology and that's how we're going to progress in the future. We're not going to sell them off. Lots of financial people talking about, well, if you sell off the fabs, maybe you can have short-term gains in margins, but Intel doesn't see that as Pat also seemed to reiterate this is fabs are crucial to Intel being Intel. Most of us think of Intel as a CPU company with fabs. In reality, they're more a fab company that just happens to sell CPUs. So if you sell the fabs, you're selling the heart of Intel. That's what that is. Second point, outsourcing only with preferential treatment. So I know a few people in the chat have been talking about this, but Intel going out to TSMC and saying, can you make chips for us? Now, Intel's already been working with TSMC for over a decade or more. They already make a bunch of stuff for Intel, FPGAs, lots of power chips. That's power as in 12-volt power, not as in power ISA from IBM. So they've been working with them for ages. They know what it's like to work with TSMC. Though the question was, would they do it in such a volume to affect TSMC's essentially build out? Now, TSMC has said they're not prepared to build out additional operations for Intel, especially if Intel get their act together on their own process and only use TSMC for one generation. Then it wouldn't be worth TSMC just building out capacity just for Intel. Though Intel has said that they will only work with TSMC or Samsung or Global Foundries only if they will get preferential treatment. And by preferential treatment, we're speaking sort of like Apple level preferential treatment. Early access to new process node development, information on how that process node development is going, tight integration with TSMC for designing the chips. Was it co-designed? I can't remember the acronym now, but it's basically co-developed the process with the chips. So you get an effective extra nodes worth of performance enhancement. That's what they want here. So they will only do that. They will only outsource if they can get that. And there have been reports at Intel outsourcing some chips to TSMC on 3nm, and that's not really confirmed. So I'll leave that at that. Intel could sub-license process node technology. This was an interesting question asked by Paul. I worked with Paul on that question just to get a very specific answer out of them, and Bob gave the specific answer, basically. So do you remember when Global Foundries was having trouble with its 14nm process? So it sub-licensed it from Samsung, the original 14, and then Global Foundries built on that 14 themselves, and Samsung built on their 14 themselves. What Intel could do is perhaps reach out to Samsung and say, can we sublicense your 5nm technology? As in, we will build it. You'll give us the details, and we'll build it in our own fabs, and we'll give you, a proportion of the cost, or a fixed fee per wafer plus a lump sum for the IP, to license the IP. That's something they could very well do, because it means if they did that, say for say Intel did that for 7nm, they're not going to, but say they did, it means that all the engineers working on a 7nm could arguably just be shifted onto 5 and just work on 5. I've put it here, it could rechannel research and development. So Intel's expected to debut gate all around FETs, or GAFETs. That's GAFETs. It's not GAA FET, it's GAFET. Nano ribbon transistors in 5nm. So that would be an important launching point for Intel. Bob said it was on the table. It's a valid option. I think Pat Gelsinger said the same in the financial call. But it looks decreasing like that's actually going to happen. Another point Bob made is technical matters more to Intel than financial. So I literally said to Bob, right, Bob's a finance guy. I didn't know at this point there would be a new CEO. But I literally just said to Bob, what's more important to Intel, technical or financial? Because one of the criticisms about Bob is he's a finance guy and it's a technical company. Bob said immediately, technical. As in, I literally finished the question and he went, technical. So that was good. He also went on for a little bit, but the fact that he said technical doesn't mean that he was going to be the person to be in the lab when the first bring up of silicon is. But he knows that investing in the tech side of the business is needed, and obviously now that Gelsinger's coming on board, that's going to be amplified, I imagine. Not enough voices at the top. So Bob also made comments about Murthy Renduchala, who came on board in a big fanfare with a 8.1 signing on bonus and 17 million in additional incentives, which he was paid 27 million in 2019 for that. So he was left. He got pushed out of the company, and it was literally just like one line in a press release, and then everybody's being rearranged now that Murthy's left. The way Bob stated that Murthy's departure was able to make the room add more technical voices to the direction of Intel. Kind of sounds like that Renduchala was essentially being the biggest voice in the room and not letting anybody else speak. I don't know how true that is. But the fact that Bob made it a point was really interesting. It just means that they get more insight into the future. And then I say Xeon, which we've covered. And this is Intel actually shipped 10nm for revenue in 2017. So that's how long it's taken to get Ice Lake Xeon to a point where they're saying there's production. So let's go back to the questions, because I realize we've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes now. Let's see. How would you feel if the industry switched over from nanometer metric to transistors per square millimeter metric? That would be better. Intel pitched a different metric for millimeter squared, transistors per millimeter squared, a few years ago at their architecture day, as in it's a mixture of base transistors and flip-flops. So these companies actually count transistors differently, which is confusing in itself. People would understand. I think they would understand million transistors per millimeter squared more, but it doesn't make for very nice marketing. Plus, also the numbers that they quote for these processes typically tend to be the densest designs. So high performance logic, high performance transistors aren't the densest transistors on a CPU. They're typically half the density or even worse than the peak density of the CPU. So, I mean, if you have a process which is rated at 100 million transistors per square millimeter, the high-speed transistors that actually do the logic, that actually do the ALUs, that do the memory lookups, might only be 60 million transistors per square millimeter or 40 million. And then also there's dark silicon comes into it with these small process nodes. There's got to be extra silicon to help radiate heat away, so there's no thermal degradation and electron migration in these CPUs. So it's a tough thing to answer. I mean, the DRAM industry kind of got around this by saying 17, 16, 15, 1x, 1y, 1z, 1 alpha nanometer. Nanometer's going to stick for CPU logic process technology because we've seen RIRAPs all the way down to 1.4 nanometer. So that's what I think about that. I know. Are you under NDA for any upcoming Radeon products? I'm not, but I don't deal with GPUs, so that's not my area. Do you think that SoCs will gain adoption in the desktop x86 market? It's if you add SoC features to a CPU, if it's monolithic, it takes up a lot of die area. If it's separate chips, then you've got to co-package them together. I mean, it does give you more control over the platform if it's like that. That's what mobile systems do. It does limit you on the high end for power if you co-package them. So I would suggest no, just because people always want more performance. Does transistor density not vary a lot within a chip? Oh, it does vary a lot. Sebastian, can you explain dark silicon better? It confuses me. Is it sleeping transistors or any such structure or empty space? I'm under the impression it's mostly empty space, as in it's just straightforward flat silicon. Or it might be, low power pathways where heat doesn't necessarily matter. AVX512 is AVX512 high current draw actually causes, due to the power draw, causes localized brownouts on parts of the CPU. So you have to design your AVX512 unit such that where it does cause brownouts due to the power draw, that doesn't affect any important logic that's currently being used when in AVX512 mode. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the context switch to AVX512 isn't cheap. That's why you can't really do it for single instructions. It really has to be for proper compute. Because the delay of making the rest of the chip aware that you're in AVX512 mode and depowering certain parts of the chip takes so long that it isn't worth just doing the one AVX512 instruction here or there. It has to be a full batch. Rich M, how are processes refined? Is it updated DUV machines or updated recipes or both? So the machines that do like the DUV and the EUV, the enhancements that happen with those machines are usually speed. Speed's the big one. Wafers per hour. How many wafers can you get out? They're all designed with such that they're not. You have such a low defect density, and obviously that's where defect density comes in as well as part of the whole equation. Power consumption and cost. That's mostly what those machines are. When they say a process is refined, it's basically things that they can do to improve yield. That might mean doing things in a different order. That may mean the ability to combine steps. It's much more of a process design thing than a enhancements at the machine level, at the manufacturing machine level. So it could also be Intel, AMD, Qualcomm, Samsung. They actually design their chips slightly differently to absorb some of those defect rates to improve yield, that sort of thing as well. With AMD's Lucien, the Zen 2 Ryzen 5000 refresh, AMD said that it's the same transistor layout, but there are a number of things in there that they couldn't do with Renoir. So that means with CPU is transistors at the bottom, then a number of metal layers, and then the metal layers help with signaling and clocking. And just to go up here, because there's a nice picture here with so Intel with their 10 nanometer superfin have introduced this super MIM capacitor in the upper metal layers, which helps them increase frequency. Things you can do on that level that don't affect the transistor layout. That helps process. That can help. It can help yield. In this case, it helps frequency, that sort of thing. So, in AMD Zen 3, the L cache is considered dark silicon, basically correct to help cool the cores. Well, the L3 cache is in use as well. So I wouldn't call that dark silicon. It's yeah. Rich has asked, well, he means more sort of like quad patterning, and yes, again, but that's more of a process development rather than say machine development. Rich also asks, so they qualify new transistor structures and how they combine them together to make them better? Yeah. Layout is key. One of the big things that Mark Papermaster said with Zen 3 is that they worked really hard on the layout to optimize for critical paths and for frequency. One of the issues with AMD's Bulldozer, for example, let alone the design, is that apparently they use a lot of automated tools to do some of that layout, and those tools aren't as good as a human. And now AMD has the money; they can actually afford to pay humans to hand optimize these things. And as we go into the future, more AI and machine learning is into that. And I will answer this question just because it's a very easy one. Do you see Intel possibly moving to chiplet design in the future? Yes, Intel has already confirmed they are doing that. It's going to be called Chiplet 2.0, and it looks like it will intercept with 7 nanometer. If you search an Antec for Client 2.0 and Intel, it's on there. So just before we get off the Intel stuff, let's cover the new CEO, Pat Gelsinger. So he's starting February 15th, which I guess is now less than 2 weeks away. Pat is an old Intel hand. He graduated high school at 16. He got his associate's degree at 18, and Intel hired him at 18. He worked there for 30 plus years at Intel. And he got to his previous role at Intel was Chief Technology Officer. He was already a C-suite executive, CTO. So he was one step away from CEO anyway. And he spent 30 years there. Lots of stories about why he left. Perhaps he got pushed out because he wanted to see a CEO role then and didn't get it, so he went somewhere else. I've asked for an interview with Pat, so we'll see if that happens. But in his time at Intel, he drove standards such as USB, Wi-Fi, played key roles in 14 generations of Intel Core and Xeon. So he spent 12 years outside the company. He spent 3 or 4 years at EMC, and then CEO of VMware since 2012. So he did a lot of. I just realised I spelled the position incorrectly. So he did a lot of technology side as a CTO. Then at VMware, it's obviously a lot of software based, and I've got a video on that with Patrick from STH. Patrick goes into some detail about what Pat actually did at VMware because he's more on the ball with that stuff. Highly recommend you go watch that video. As with all my videos. But yeah, so Pat is a tech guy at heart. And the funny thing is, so PC World, Gordon and Brad, Alina, and sorry, I forget the fourth guy's name, but they do a yearly prediction list for the year in tech, and I just happened to be in the comments during their stream, and I said, Intel gets a new CEO, just for a laugh, because it's been rumored about for so long, and Gordon washed his hands of it and said, Ian, you can have that prediction, and we'll see if you're right. And 2 weeks later, Intel announced a new CEO. So, Pat Gelsinger was on the financial call with Intel. Intel did end of year financials as well. So, and Pat did say he's been looking at the company, been evaluating process node and direction, and confident that 7 nanometer, as he's seen it so far, is good and is going to work. Yeah, I've done a full transcript of the Intel Financial Call Q&A section on AnandTech. We won't go over it here, but he goes into some of that. It kind of sounds like he's got an office at Intel already, and it's just February the 15th is the moment where Bob walks out the door, and then Pat takes over. So Pat seems to be very much into Intel right now, Pat. So the question is Pat the right CEO for Intel? Is he the best choice CEO for Intel? Everybody I've spoken to says yes, he is the best choice out of the typical people that we expected to get the job. A few other names on the list weren't as good as fit as Pat. I must clarify, the names on the list we thought were on the list. We never get an official list. So Pat was the best there, engineer. He's the sort of person who can be in the room with those 5 other chief engineers of the company and understand exactly what they're talking about, whereas Bob had to have a translator. So he's going to be the one. I suspect he's the sort of person who, when the first chip comes in of a new design, he'll be there with the engineers during the bring up. He will want to be in the engineering room where it's actually, CEO has a lot of demands on their time. So he is the right person there. A lot of questions about whether he can affect change at Intel and when he can affect change at Intel. A lot of analysts have said, well, anything Pat does now, we won't see it for 3 to 5 years. I outright say that's false. Simply because if we're talking product, okay, I agree with you. But Pat can change the company philosophy, the attitude on day one. He's the fact that he's being rehired as CEO means that there are a lot of people who there's some older engineers who have taken retirement or have gone to different companies are coming back to Intel simply because Pat's now CEO, and they believe that Pat will be Pat will know where to direct the money and where to direct the people and actually encourage people to come back to Intel. There's a general feeling that Intel's been hemorrhaging talent over the last few years. So this brings it onto that path. And he can very definitely change the future. He can change the attitude inside Intel very quickly. People do their best when they're the most excited, the most encouraged. And Pat is doing that already, and he's not even in the door. So the only concern, sorry, I will talk about the concerns I have with Pat. He is a member of the old Intel guard, right? Been there 30 years, out for 12, get some experience, come back, CEO. He's a member of the old guard. The people coming back to work at Intel are the old guard from Intel. At some point, Intel is going to have a new generation of engineers, whether that's built up from inside the company or coming in from outside. And they've kind of been trying that with Rendra Tinchala, with Keller, with Raj Kaduri, and with a number of other names that have come to Intel over the last few years. But there's still that core group of Intel engineers that need to be new. And rehiring old hands reinforces that, well, we're hiring in people who know what they're doing, therefore that will set the next generation up to go well. But arguably, these people were still there with the old generation. So it does worry me that Intel's, going back to the whole, let's have a boardroom full of, I hate to say it, but the old white guy boardroom. It's the old hands. They're all men in their 50s and 60s. Intel has been on a diversity hire of late, and they're being open with the diversity of their hires. I very much hope that continues. I suspect Pat's the sort of Pat as an engineer might leave that to Sandra Riviera, who's the chief people officer, I think. It's that. I would have liked Intel arguably to hire. So Intel's got a big base in India. If they had hired a female Intel a female Indian CEO, that would have blown the socks off. I mean, obviously questions about technical prowess with anybody, But at some point, Intel needs to think about a new generation of people behind the company. It can't just be the old generation again. Standard length of CEO for Intel is actually 7 to 12 years. The last two were the odd ones out, so that's Brian Gazanich and Bob Swan. Brian was for 5, Bob for 2.5. So if Pat's there for another 12 years, one of the things he's going to have to do is build up the next generation of diverse Intel engineers for the executive spots. He's going to have to. It's not, and he's going to have to get his hands involved with that. So, but yeah, and here he is with Itanium. So that chip is let's do some show and tell. Let me see if I can see that chip. It says Itanium 2, and I think that's the same as Pat's there. Yeah, that's when he was CTO in the early 2000s. I picked this. I actually got this off eBay for £15. I haven't seen one as cheap since. And there's actually pins on the bottom. If you've never seen the bottom of an Itanium, it's actually pins on the bottom there. It's really cool. I did see some super chats come in. Thanks, Gordon, for the 2 lots of $5. Ian was right. No need to eat paper, but Ian's almost always right. So not really fair. No. I just ask too many questions. And sometimes I ask questions that look like I'm an idiot. But, you know, these Q&As, I do like the roundtable Q&As where we get a diverse bunch of questions. I mean, there are always things that, you know, either Gordon or Paul asks that I never think of. Some of the other questions, I think, why the hell are you asking that? Are you a plant? That's a topic for a different time. Thanks to Joshua Herman for the $5. When we get to 2 nanometer, are we just going to see larger and larger SoCs? To be honest, I think as we get smaller, as we can do smaller transistors and more dense CPUs, I think the 100 square millimeters is probably the low end for a high performance CPU. I mean, mobile SoCs are 100 square millimeters, but with the extra transistor budget, it gets spent on focused, dedicated IP blocks for acceleration. So cryptography acceleration like AES or SHA. So AMD has a SHA accelerator. VIA has a SHA accelerator. And Intel instead uses AVX512, which is a lot more power hungry. So it's funny to see a VIA system, an 8-core VIA system on SHA-256 outperform Intel's top 28 core on SHA-256. That isn't AVX512 accelerated. But you know, it's little things like AV1 decode. Apple spends a lot of its silicon doing its, you know, Apple raw format accelerators for decode. We'll just get a lot of things like that. You know, we might even have, you know, dedicated ray tracing on the CPU at one point in, you know, small amounts, but as the transistor budgets get bigger, they add more of these things in. So Rich asks, does AMD have a supercomputer for AI helping design chips like NVIDIA does? Does Intel? So Intel has announced that they're putting more AI and machine learning into their chip design. I wrote a story on this at Anantech. It's, Intel ML. This is where Anantech's search is actually quite terrible. And it's usually best to do Google. Intel ML site anantech.com. I agree. I have done an article on this, I'm sure. But yeah, Intel has decided. Intel has said that they're going to use more machine learning. All the companies do. All the software, all the EDA tools already do some form of machine learning to help with layouts and that sort of thing. I mean, one of the funny things coming in is, maybe it would have helped NZXT with their recent fire issues, but yeah, Dave Jones says never trust the auto router. That's true. One of the things that EDA tools will have a problem with is as we move to stacked silicon. Stacked silicon is very difficult for EDA tools because you've got through silicon vias, you've got interference patterns with power vias versus signaling data vias. You got to make sure that there's no interference between those links, and you got to make sure that they don't cause localized power brownouts as power is moved through, especially because most designs, all designs, will have the most power hungry chip at the top because that will get the most cooling until we get inter-chip cooling sorted, and that won't be for another 2 decades probably. That's always 2 decades away, inter-chip cooling. But yeah, even the Chinese DRAM company that I can't remember its name of, with its 3D X stacking. Is it 3D X stacking or is it just X stacking? I'll come back to so Yangtze Memory is doing a kind of dual wafer bonding design. It's TSMC has wafer on wafer bonding as well. They've shown that they've shown 12 stack that I think. Again, I've got another article on Antec on that. But yeah, you have to make the EDA tools realize that there's going to be a chip above and a chip below, and then you're going to machine learning all of that. It's a lot of difficulty. Okay, so shifting gears from Intel to AMD, interviewed AMD's Lisa Su. This is a screenshot from the presentation where she's looking. I'll use to describe that. I used a particular word. Well, I'm wearing my Intel t-shirt, so I can say AMD Lisa looks badass in that. And then, another screenshot. I would never expect Bob Swan to be in that pose. If Pat Gelsinger is in that pose, that'd be interesting. So Lisa, this was a more traditional Q&A, well, a roundtable Q&A. Though AMD put some really weird restrictions saying that we couldn't do a one-to-one transcript. They wanted us to use quotes, but not do a direct, full 100% quote. Excuse me, where are they? Take care of a spammer. So, this was weird. I didn't necessarily like this format of taking quotes because a proper Q&A needs to have question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. This is what these things are. So I asked about whether the upcoming ARM designs, not necessarily speaking about Apple here, but ARM's roadmap is promising a 30 to 50% year-on-year increase in performance. And that's obviously going to overtake x86 performance if it can execute, and Apple's kind of already shown that it can. So what can... does AMD, see this as a threat? What can AMD do to this? And Lisa's answer was relatively non-committal. Lisa's answer was not committal either way, whether it sees it as a threat. So she just basically says that what things like ARM does is it allows custom designs in the market. As in, you will have customers who will want a very specific thing, and something like ARM will do that. So somebody will be able to take ARM designs and go make those specific chips for those specific customers. She didn't talk about those specific customers arguably being AMD's key customers, like cloud providers. And we've already seen Graviton 2 at Amazon, and Ampere Ultra is a very high performance chip. So the next generations of those are going to be pretty impressive. But Lisa was saying more like, well, we're really strong at x86, and that's where we'll do. I did ask what if a customer says, well, can we make an ARM Neoverse chip with AMD on a semi-custom basis. And Lisa said, yeah, absolutely. That's the sort of thing our semi-custom does. If you want to create an ARM chip with us, great. Come to us. We'll help you. So they will do ARM, but it looks like they won't take the risk themselves, or at least in this answer, Lisa was very non-committal. We did ask about, the M1. So I asked a very pointed question. I said, well, Apple's making its own chip, its own silicon now for itself. And it obviously has a strong history with graphics. Apple currently uses AMD graphics in its workstations and notebooks. Do they use it in notebooks? But arguably, Apple could easily just make their own GPU and push that relationship aside, just like they have with the Intel relationship. Lisa wasn't. It's Apple continues to work with us as their graphics partner, and we work with them. That's all she'd say on it. So supply chain demand. This was a big part of the conversation. It was asked, AMD's got a lot of demand, but limited supply. Do you see your market share increasing? And Lisa turned around and basically said, it's we've launched several new products over the last while. That's I covered them earlier. It's Radeon 5000, Radeon 5000 Mobile, Radeon RX 6000. Then we've got Radeon RX 6000 Mobile, and then the low end Radeon RX 6000 coming. They've got 2 consoles, and they're making millions of chips for those. I think I worked out that they spent 12,000 wafers just on the PS5. And that was when it was 2.3 million PS5s. It might even be double that now. That's the sort of level that they make. That's assuming, a TSMC defect rate of 0.07 per square centimeter, which is 0.09 square centimeter with a die size. That was a yield of 89%. And then, you can do it. It's relatively easy to do the math on that. And then we've got AMD EPYC, the Milan next gen EPYC. That's all essentially in their allocation. Rather than just making 1 or 2, they've got to make all of those. And the customers that have priority are going to be ones that have contracts already. So say AMD has a contract with Dell for 100,000 GPUs to be delivered by February. That means all the GPUs are going to go to that contract because they have to fill that contract, or there will be penalties in that contract. So fulfilling OEM orders like that. And I actually was watching PC World's Full Nerd yesterday Q&A session, and they were talking about how you can buy laptops with GPUs in, or desktops with GPUs in, for cheaper than you can buy just the GPU on its own at retail because of scalpers and demand and such. So that's where a lot of AMD supply is going. AMD, obviously, like I said, making lots of Milan chips because they want Milan to be the next big revenue generator. So when Milan comes out here in a bit, there's expected to be lots of OEM designs around Milan. I expect we're going to be bombarded with offers to review Milan systems when that comes out. So there's last time AMD launched Rome, we asked AMD's Forrest Narod, who's the head of the enterprise and semi-custom business, embedded enterprise semi-custom EESC, and he said that they had to turn half the OEM designs away just because they didn't have the resources to help support those designs on Rome. So they've been hiring hand over fist since launch of Rome for Milan. So I expect we're going to see 50, 100, maybe even more Milan systems come day one. And because it's kind of like a drop-in for Rome as well, same socket, there's going to be a lot to speak about Milan, and that's where I think a lot of the 8-core Zen 3 chiplets are going. So the reason why they're not going to Ryzen 5000 is probably because they're going into EPYC. EPYC is a higher margin product. If you've got demand and you've got to filter your chiplets into your highest margin product, it's going to go in EPYC, not in Ryzen 5000. That's just how it is. So Lisa said, high demand. I did a tweet out earlier today saying that I don't like the word shortage, because the word shortage implies that AMD isn't making is in a lower product. They're making fewer chips than they have been previously. That's what a shortage to me sounds like. Whereas in fact, AMD is making chips hand over fist. They're selling everything they make. Don't forget they've also got console contracts that they have to fill. There's millions and millions of APUs there, and tens of thousands of wafers, like I've said. But it's a period of high demand. AMD, you could say, well, why did AMD not predict this? Because you have to put these orders in 3 to 6 months in advance with TSMC. So everybody underpredicted the global pandemic. Q3 and Q4 were tremendously busy times for work from home and education, and that caused a lot of uptick in demand. It seems that everybody and their dog wants high-end GPUs. Everyone and their dog wants high-speed CPUs. Everybody has built up several months. Everybody who's been able to work, and I feel bad for you if the pandemic has affected you in that way. But those who have been working, they've not been spending money going out. They've not been spending money going on holiday. So they're saving up. So they think, right, I'm going to have a monster gaming system. I'm prepared to spend a lot. And we see this with people spending over the odds for scalping prices today. Everybody mispredicted that. Intel mispredicted that. AMD mispredicted that. So they're all scrambling to make more wafers. And AMD doubly so because they've also got to build up stock for their big launches in Q1 as well. So there's that. Then also in AMD's financial calls, in their inventories, if you look through, they say the inventories last year was about $1 billion and now is 1.4 billion. Now, what they mean by inventory doesn't mean chips that are in a warehouse. This means they have wafers currently on the production going through TSMC, wafers that they've paid for, or the value of those wafers currently in production. So imagine you've got a production line, start to finish, that your inventory's value is your value of finished product that's sitting in a warehouse, of which AMD has 0, plus everything that's in that production line from start to finish. And that has grown by 400 million, by 40% in a year. So AMD has already increased its wafer orders with TSMC, and they are currently in production, and they'll be coming out as product over the next few months. It sounds like AMD is ordering yet more to deal with the demand, and that may have. One could argue that could have knock-on delays with AMD's future products as well, whether they decide just to ride out the storm or whether they just decide to drop it quickly and then move on to the next. Lots of questions there. AMD has said that there will be tightness in consumer product lines, especially low-end consumer product lines, until the second half of the year. Because obviously when you have high demand, you build your high-margin products, and your low-margin products, like your embedded processors and your education processors, tend to get put on the wayside for the epics and what have you. Bearing in mind that AMD has more wafers than they thought they would do several years ago, because TSMC no longer has to support Huawei. So we're arguably in a better position than we could have been. Thanks, Trump. Let's see. What else was I going to say about the supply and demand? Yes, another thing here was brought up was the substrate shortages. So along with getting your wafer allocation for production, you've got a wafer, now you've got to cut it up and put it on a package. Packaging is, AMD has a number of packaging facilities, and they also do outsourcing packaging facilities. And it turns out that specific products don't have the required supply chain for packages and are just waiting to be packaged. So they're still in that inventory stage where they're waiting to be packaged. So AMD is working with its third-party packaging partners to build out more capacity there, but it will take time. It was something that AMD didn't necessarily predict due to this high demand. So two factors there. Lisa said that the substrate issues are on specific products, issues with specific products. You didn't say which ones. I'm just trying to think, what are the most complex packaging parts that AMD makes these days. 'Cause, they don't do any GPUs with HBM except for on the enterprise side. That would mean probably the desktop CPUs and the EPYC CPUs. They're probably the most difficult to package right now. So that's probably where some of the holdup is. And if they've got lots of wafers of chiplets, they're going to be packaging them into EPYCs, not Ryzen 5000s. The one other key area that I think Lisa wanted to, so two more areas. One about the prices of GPUs and what can AMD do to reduce those. They've said there'll be, so normally with every launch they sell a certain amount of product through their own website, and normally that gets cut off quite quick because they hand it over to their board partners to do that. ASUS, MSI, EVGA. No, not EVGA. All those board partners to do all the sales for them. But unfortunately, obviously, they're at the behest of scalpers and what have you. So what AMD will do is they will continue to sell at MSRP on AMD website. So if you're after a CPU or GPU, don't just look at the retailers, also look at the AMD website, because they'll be putting more stock into their, based on what all their other contracts need to be doing. So then she also talked about roadmap, focusing on Zen 4, Zen 5, RDNA 3, and they just launched CDNA. And then okay, I lied about how many more parts. There's more parts. Lisa said the biggest thing, the big exciting non-product thing coming this year is the merger with Xilinx. I've covered that in another video, but they said everything's going along swimmingly there. They're meeting all the regulatory requirements, and that should happen by the end of the year. I'm pretty sure if I asked for an interview with the Xilinx CEO, Victor, I've met him a couple of times. He's a nice guy. I could do that, though whether he would actually say much on the acquisition, I'm not sure. And the other element is so AMD's focus this year. I've mentioned they're launching so many products, and they've got so many in the pipe that there's going to be there's a lot to deal with. But what AMD are focusing on this year isn't you or me. It's enterprise and it's commercial contracts. So things that guarantee long-term revenue streams. So enterprise is a long-term revenue stream. If you deal the contracts, same way that Intel has dealt very strongly with their enterprise contracts, and the reason why they've been able to be so strong is because people are baked on Intel and they have contracts, 5, 7, 10 year layout with Intel. AMD's now in a position where they can start building out those 3, 5, 7, 10 year contracts with their enterprise partners and with their OEMs. So with EPYC Milan, the goal is to essentially make sure they have those contracts in place because it's a guaranteed revenue stream for the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years. Same on the commercial side. What I mean by commercial, Ryzen Pro is typically in this space, but it covers a wide area. Basically, you want companies like AMD a few years ago, back in the bulldozer days, said that Snapple, Dr. Pepper, ordered 50,000 laptops for their business. Essentially, all the employees that need a laptop got an updated AMD laptop at the time. That's what they mean by a commercial sale. So what they're diving in here with Ryzen Mobile, Ryzen 5000 Mobile, Ryzen 5000 Mobile Pro when that comes out, when that is announced, and also Ryzen Pro and then Threadripper Pro, and to a certain extent EPYC as well, is get those commercial contracts, get those substantial orders, get those sustained. It's basically large support contracts, right? So when Snapple Dr. Pepper buys 50,000 units, they might buy them from Dell, and then AMD supports Dell, supports the company. So both enterprise and commercial, they're not you or me, unless you work for a company that decides to buy one of those systems, which means that everything consumer. So just to be clear, consumers are the lowest rung of importance. If you're a high-end enthusiast, yes, we make the most noise online, but we are the lowest importance when it comes to driving regular revenue. And AMD is in such a strong position now and got such strong demand that they can charge premium prices for these long-term revenue-generating contracts. I mean, Lisa just said the focus was on enterprise and commercial. What that means is what I just said. It's a really bad time to build a PC. I just did a CPU guide today, went up today, and I won't go through it just because it's really depressing. It's arguably the most depressing article I've written in quite a while at Nantech. I mean, the Ryzen 5000 CPUs are in Amazon's top 15 bestsellers, but as you can see, they can be anywhere from 20% more expensive up to 70% more expensive. Ignore that £750. That's out of stock. I've checked. But you can buy these at AMD.com if they have any in stock. But yeah, that top end 5950X is whopping plus 74% over suggested retail price. And yeah, my recommendations based on these. So normally for the $1,500 PC, I'd suggest a $300 processor. But because GPUs are so expensive, you've got to suppress the CPU to. That's what I did with that. And I arguably didn't even include this AMD one. Which would have made a shocking all Intel recommendation in February 2021. Yeah, I wouldn't see that coming. And then $500, I said get a console if you can find one. Again, high demand. $300 gaming potato. I usually put the AMD Athlon 3000G in there, which is about $60. It's selling for $100. It's If you want some fun building a system, go on eBay, try and find an old Xeon E5 2600 V2. You're not going to get a latest system unless you're prepared to pay over the odds or buy a pre-built where you might not be gouged so much. So yeah, that's the state of the CPU market. Come back Q3, really. And yes, I did a CPU, wherefore art thou CPU. And then I want to highlight here in the bottom of the guide, I go over all the CPUs that I've reviewed recently, if you've never seen this before. So I did the 10850K, 10700K, and 10700 in January, looking for a Jasper Lake. If you see Jasper Lake for sale, please DM me. Please shoot me a tweet. Very important. But yeah, and then we've got Threadripper Pro, which is just over there. Oh, and still running Crisis, this dual-core Jaguar CPU, running a 2080 Ti. So this isn't, so super slow. And last topic I want to talk on today before we get to general Q&A. If you've got questions, please put them in chat. Helps if you tag me because then I will obviously see them. But Qualcomm to acquire Nuvia, CPU magnitude shift. I did a video on this, but I want to cover it separately. Just so Nuvia, if you don't know, is basically a company founded by ex-Apple engineers that have built the last several generations of Apple CPUs. So they know high performance, they know ARM. They wanted to do a server chip, and Apple basically said, we're not interested yet. So they founded their own company, got an ARM architecture license, and started designing a server CPU built on high performance ARM cores. And they got almost $300 million in funding over two rounds of funding, been together for 2 years. The people at the top, Gerard Williams III, John Bruno, Manu Gulati, they've also hired a lot of key people around the industry that we have known and heard of. Very strong engineering team. They've just been acquired by Qualcomm for $1.4 billion. And the interesting thing here is that Qualcomm have said basically that they've acquired Nuvia to bolster their Snapdragon business. It doesn't sound like they're interested in the server CPU at all. So it looks like and Qualcomm already has history in servers, and they didn't do so well, and they pulled the plug way too early. So the whatever high performance core Nuvia is designed, or what high performance SoC, it looks like it's going to be repackaged for smartphones and laptops. I think Qualcomm really want to do some damage in laptops, take some share from Intel, and the thing that's been hurting Windows on Snapdragon is performance, especially 64-bit emulation, which hasn't really got to a point where it's properly public yet. So if one of the issues about going to 64-bit x86 emulation is just having the raw performance. So having new high performance ARM-based cores in there will help that. And then, smartphone obviously follows quite easily from that. I wouldn't be surprised. It's knowing what I know about the founders of Nuvia, they were really adamant on doing a data center CPU. The fact that they're now no longer doing that means that I've got a feeling that they'll maybe stay at Qualcomm for a couple of years and maybe come back out again and redo it again and get more funding again. And we'll see how that goes. But yeah, a lot of people have said, well, does this and Apple M1 make it more competitive, make ARM more competitive in the ecosystem? The thing is, you could argue that our M1 is only competitive in the ecosystem because of the architecture, and the architecture is only there because Apple designed it. Every other company, Samsung, Qualcomm, MediaTek, Huawei, they've had every generation to create their own CPU and create it with as high performance as Apple does. I mean, it's literally laying transistors out in a floor plan. Now you could argue that there's a lot of IP that goes into it, and there's it also requires smart people to do it. But Qualcomm designed their own CPUs and decided that ARMs were better. It wasn't worth the effort to invest. Samsung designed their own CPUs and decided that ARM could do it better, and it wasn't worth investing in their own CPU design team. And Apple's the only one that really does it. Does this mean that there's an attack on the x86 market from Apple? Only for people who want Apple products. Apple has never sold their silicon to anybody else. So it's not as if there's going to be a rush of ARM products attacking the x86 market, either in desktop, in laptop. Server's special case, which I think we covered before. But it depends on what cores people are using. Apple do Apple cores. If Qualcomm now has Nuvia, so we may see Qualcomm be more competitive on that front. But it still requires everybody else that's doing ARM designs to actually have a high performance product. ARM is promising, year 30-50% performance. This is why I ask AMD and Intel CEOs about where do they stand with ARM performance. And it's going to be a while. Do I think Apple is going to move up the stack with their silicon? Yeah. Do I think it's going to happen on any reasonable timescale? No. Apple is always late to the party on that. Because it has to work to a certain level that appeases Apple's customers. So will the iMacs next generation still be Intel, or will they move to their own silicon? It's hard to say. It's one thing to design a 7 to 25 watt SoC for laptops. It's another thing to go and make an 85 watt CPU for desktops, because when you build a CPU, obviously you build it you have a very specific power window where it's most efficient. Now, Intel and AMD over the years, Intel still does. Both of the companies still have you have a high-powered CPU and a low-powered CPU, and they go into different products because the optimization point is different. Intel's made noise in the past that its CPUs scale from the 10 watts to the 120 watts or the 250 watt parts. AMD does the same, and it's always a question of how low can you go and how much of the SoC power is needed. So it's not as simple as just adding more cores, because you can't add more cores without also improving the bandwidth, without also improving the memory controller, also improving all the additional features. So, for example, if Apple was going to conform to PCIe or CXL standards, how many lanes will they have? Will they just have 16? Will they have 20? Will they have some odd number like 36? Will they be locked down to Apple's only products? there's a lot of questions here. Again, memory controllers, maybe they'll just do desktop CPUs with LPDDR on them. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. There are a lot of options available to Apple, and we know a few people based at Apple who make some really good decisions. So yeah, we'll see on that. I think it won't be as fast as what everybody makes out. I don't think it'll be as wide as everybody makes out. I think the products that Apple comes to market with will be really good for that market if you're part of the Apple ecosystem. If you're not, they probably won't be. So yeah, that's my whole Apple M1 ARM taking over x86 diatribe. There's a lot of elements to that. So you may agree with me, you may not. If you don't, comment below. Usual YouTube stuff. But that's how it goes. Yeah, that's kind of the end of my news. That was all in my script to talk about. See, did I miss anything? If you're wondering, my script kind of looks like that. It's pretty basic. So yeah, Q&A time. I'm going to go back through Q&A, and James, you've arrived quite late. James Pry, if you don't know, runs PR for Sci5, RISC-V. Good guy. He also does PR for the Ice Giant Siphon Cooler. And he asks, did you see the Mercury market share data? I haven't read it. I did get an email from one of the companies mentioned in that report saying, would you like to do a news post on it? I mentioned earlier that, they said Intel has 92% market share. AMD says it has over 10%. And I went through how Intel and AMD measure what they think the server market is differently. And, Mercury is as Mercury does. Ice Giant, there we go. Sorry, James was working for a living. What do you think I'm doing? So I'm going to go in reverse chronological order, so please bear with me. Speak Out and Ruled Out says, do you think all this 7nm tightness might mean AMD will pull in 5nm products so it can supply enough 7nm EPYC more easily as Ryzen and RDNA is on 5nm? Quite possibly, depending on how much 5nm allocation they have. TSMC's 5nm is essentially the same defect rate as its 7nm, so there won't be any change there. One of TSMC's 5nm fab is meant to do over 120,000 wafers a month, and at the minute most of them are going to Apple, obviously. Though I did say that, because of high demand, and AMD's in a position where time to market was their big message, as in every year, new products, whatever the other company's doing, don't care. Let's just come up with new products every year, increasing performance. And designs are being done. Normally in the past, Intel, would wait until they've saturated the market with a product before bringing in the next one. AMD could do that because they have the performance leadership. Though arguably, if they keep on their yearly cadence, and if that means moving, Ryzen 5000 being so brief and so short that the next generation comes out, or whether it's Radeon RX 6000 or what have you, that they just go straight on to the next process node with the next product. That's a very real possibility. But then demand will shift to the next generation product, and everything works in cycles, and it'll be up to them to keep doing the cycles. Gordon's here too. Everybody from the Twitter land. The thing about M1 is that it allows little endian data to be used with emulated x86 instructions without having to switch to big endian ordering, if I understand that correctly. There is a translation issue. I'm not sure if it's that. To be honest, I haven't gone that deeply into the reasons why. But if Qualcomm have acquired Nuvia, they might just have sorted that out anyway. How much do you think Nuvia cores will be implemented in Qualcomm's mobile processors? Would it just be the X1 type cores only, or A7X and A5X too? To be honest, we're not 100% sure. Just come back down to this issue, this article, because this is the graph that Nuvia supplied, saying that they're building a core that works from 1 to 5 watts and offers double the performance, or 1.5 times the performance of the A13. Now, don't forget the A14 is already up here. So if that's the sort of core they're doing, 5 watts max, then it looks set to be a good representative for a big core, or a large core and a large small design in a dynamic design. So I suspect if they wanted to push it to X1 territory, I mean, arguably you could bring X1 down as well, but it's all a trade-off with die size as well. We don't know the die size. It could be tiny, it could be massive. Probably massive. KW asks, hang on, did I switch back? No. KW asks, do you think future Atom microarchitecture past Gracemont will ever support AVX512, so both Core and Atom cores heterogeneously can run without current older lake limitations? At the point where the process node is dense enough, yes. Simply just because, like I say, when you get more dense and you can put more transistors into a core, into a chip, you get some inherent limitations on how well you can scale out cores for power. So you start doing optimized accelerators, and something like AVX512 can fit in that. Colt Marshmallow asks, what product or technology would you like the industry to put more of a focus on? I'm not sure what technology? Packaging. I'm a big fan of good packaging. TSMC's last year they did their tech day where they went over all the different types of packaging, and you got things like wafer-on-wafer bonding. They've got their EMIB variant, they've got their Foveros variant, they've got combinations of both, and they're doing demo chips in that. The push to things like active interposers or making SoC on interposers, kind of like the Lakefield does. Intel's got a big team working on that. I've interviewed Ramune Nagosetti, who's part of that team, a senior member of that team. You can see that interview on Anantech. Actually, I'll bring it up here. But yeah, it's. I think if you think when we were a single core, the focus was frequency. Then we went into multi-core because frequency hit a limit, and now we're hitting a multi-core limit, so we're having to go to chiplets. When we hit a chiplet limit, I mean, how many chips can you put on a substrate? We've got chips with 9. There are reports that we're going to have 15, 16. We've got XE. You see in the XE HPC GPU that Raja showed. That had how many chips on it? 20. We're hitting that limit now where we have to start stacking, have to start being smart about packaging. And in that, as I've said before, comes a whole bunch of EDA tool production, being smart about where power and signaling goes, and having to deal with additional power losses of additional length tracing. Because don't forget, Lakefield was a dual layer. So you had the SoC, you had the cores, and then you had the DRAM on die. But the DRAM wasn't attached to the cores because the cores were the power hungry part. So it came round. So if a core wanted to access memory, it had to go down through the SoC layer into the package, up around the package into the DRAM, and then all the way back round. We still never tested a Lakefield. Nobody would sample us. So can't really speak to that. But yeah, no, here's the interview with Ramune. She's really, really nice to speak to. It's a shame I haven't got to see her over the past year to sync up. but we went through a lot of stuff about Intel's technology, implementations and thermals, and how to deal with that. So this is where the compute die has to go all the way around to the memory and then back in, which is arguably higher latency than just doing standard on package, or maybe it's shorter. I don't know, but anyway, it seems a lot more convoluted than just going straight line in, straight line out, right? So future, going beyond 2 die to 3 or 4, different monolithic Z height and modems and this sort of packaging stuff. That's where the next revolution is on interconnect and packaging, and Intel's going for that, TSMC is going for that, AMD's working with TSMC for that. AMD's purchased Xilinx because one of Xilinx's key areas is packaging technology. So there. Hope that answers your question, Colt Marshmallow. Bob M, any info regarding Threadripper 5000? Nope. Milan first, then Threadripper, maybe come back Computex time, maybe later because of the whole AMD demand thing. Rich M, isn't Xilinx ahead in 3D SoC designs, which could help with Zen 4 3D stacking? Yes. It's nice when these questions flow into each other. Rich M, do you think the Xilinx purchase will combine Xilinx IP into AMD GPUs? They've had quite a few GPU patents about reconfigurable designs lately. So the big question is, when will GPU move to chiplet? Because obviously packaging comes into that. The problem is, when you separate GPUs into chiplets, you have to completely change the paradigm of how the compute happens. So in the standard monolithic GPU, obviously you have your thread scheduler, and the latency between that and the execution units is well known and it's very regular. When you start, and you also have a unified memory design where every execution unit essentially has same speed access to caches and LPDDR or HBM. When you separate out into chiplets, you've now got a NUMA style design where you might have your standard I/O chiplet and then compute chiplets, but then you've got to be able to manage all the data. And you get into a situation where the data movement costs more energy than a compute. That's another issue with these chiplet and different stacking and interconnect technologies, and all these packaging technologies come out, is every time you move data off die into a new die, that consumes a lot more power than just simple compute. So AMD talks about petajoules per bit. TSMC's wafer on wafer is talking about tenths of petajoules per bit. I actually spoke to a company last year at Hot Chips that's dealing with when you do petajoules per bit, you can actually work out how many electrons that is, and it's somewhere in the order of 10 to 20,000 if I remember correctly, and maybe off by a couple of orders of magnitude, maybe a couple million. But this was a company dealing with trying to make that energy movement down to 1 electron or 10 by using vacuum channels. I should do a video on the technology. It's interesting. Still very early research stage. But if that can drive down the power of interconnect, then that's the sort of direction where to go. I answered that question. Milan is on 7 nanometer plus, not enhanced TSMC 7 nanometer. No, it's just on straightforward N7. It is just on N7. It's not on N7 plus or N7P. Rich, my brother tried to build a computer. It was too expensive, so he went to iBuyPower. Yep. That's what you do. Let's see. Thanks, Will. Speak out and riveled out. What percentage wafer increase do you think AMD would need from TSMC so that every customer retailer is satisfied and fully stocked? Because these have such long lead times, and TSMC doesn't just make one product and then move on to the next, then move on to the next. They always have lots of customers' products in flight at once. And it's demand today is not necessarily demand tomorrow. As in, if Intel could if AMD could satisfy all of its demand with 50,000 wafers at once, of course that would also bring the price way down, and they wouldn't want to. They have to combine getting enough wafers, but also not doing too many to oversaturate the market and dilute the product. It's a tough one to answer because we don't necessarily know exactly how many wafers AMD gets a month from TSMC. Like I say, one console after a month at launch had the equivalent of 12,000 wafers, but AMD would have been making those chips for months beforehand. So they could have been dedicating 1,000 to 2,000 wafers a month at that point, or maybe more. We don't know. It's hard to say. PS5 is up to 4.5 million consoles. Thanks, Rich. That's over 30,000 wafers right there over 3 months. Yeah. So AMD has said that Q1 will have better than expected console sales. But Q1, typically the depression after launch is that the next quarter after launch will decline by about, as they'd say, 12 to 18%. AMD is still expecting a decline in console sales, but it will be mid-single digits, not 12 to 18%. So anywhere from 4 to 7%, I guess. But that also affects AMD's average selling price and their margins. But they're they're expecting record revenue for Q1. So let's go over to some of the more newer questions. What do you think it would take to cool a Rocket Lake i9, i7 with all cores of 5 gigahertz? And what's the performance difference between having the two both having 8 cores? So some of you know that I have the 14-core i9 9990XE, which runs all 14 cores at 5 gigahertz. And that's on a system level, it consumes north of 600 watts with a very basic GPU in it. That's AVX512. That's peak. And I said, PL2 at 250 watts. That's going to be for all cores at 4 point something gigahertz. So if you want all cores at 5, you're going to need at least 320, 350 watts of cooling, I reckon, minimum. I don't think you really should. What process nodes do you think the Ryzen 4 IO chiplet will use? I'm going to say it's either Global Foundries or TSMC. That's a non-answer. I don't know if AMD's at a point now where they could start designing their IO dies on multiple process nodes and then just order the one that they need. You could go into wafer agreements with Global Foundries and whatnot. But I suspect in that instance they might just take the one that, if they want to make sure they have definitely enough volume, they'll keep on Global Foundries 14. Whether it'll have anything new in it, unsure. How many watts per core for Zen 3 and Rocket Lake? So Zen 3 maxes out at 25, 26 watts per core if you run one core flat out. Did I put the numbers in my 5950X review? I think I did. Let me just, per core power draw. So 5950X did 20.6 watts per core. 5900X did 17.9, 17.3, 11.8. So 20, 22 watts per core. I can't remember where I've seen 26 watts per core. Maybe that was in a 280 watt chip. And then for Rocket Lake, because we're backporting Ice Lake, and sorry, I'm searching on AnandTech because I have all this data. Let's look at Tiger Lake for single core power usage. Power consumption. That's multi-core. Can I not get the core? Oh no, it's only AMD cores that do proper data like this. But yeah, it was maximum power draw in turbo mode is 50 watts, but that's all core. Single is probably going to be around the 25, 28, but that's Tiger Lake. Rocket Lake on 14 nanometer bigger. It's probably going to be more, to be honest. It's going to be more. Thoughts on Raja has been working on posting about likely to be an enterprise FPGA solution. Not sure. I mean, he's been working hard on the GPU side. Intel did a CPU plus FPGA Xeon Gold for a while. I mean, if you ask a lot of people in the industry, Intel's kind of squandered the Altera acquisition. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with FPGAs. And Altera used to be the market leader, and they're not anymore. That division isn't anymore. They've not paid enough attention to it. They've not integrated it more deeply. Thing is, FPGA is the sort of product where if you need one, you know you need one, and you have the technical expertise to use it. If you don't know you need one, then you're not going to look at it. And it's very hard to learn to use. So what they need to do, I mean, Intel also bought the eASIC business, which is kind of like halfway between a proper ASIC and an FPGA, where they can do where they can increase that sort of time to market element of the FPGA, but it's not configurable to the same extent. So there's room to put FPGAs in for other accelerator type things that they're not spending CPU budget on, but FPGAs consume more power, and there's a lot of things like that. So what Raja's been working on, I'm not sure. We might hear about it with Ice Lake Xeon launch. Who knows? We'll see. Focus on packaging. I was thinking nice product boxes for a second. It's funny. So Intel recently ditched the fancy product packaging for the Core i9 10900K because it was. I'm sure I showed it earlier. Let's see if I can bring it up. Yeah, let's. So I mean, I know this is the article about Rocket Lake, but this is the 10900K packaging. And he announced that they're going to stop doing that, basically. And I saw a few news articles that basically said, good, because now you can fit more on a pallet, therefore you're saving energy flying around the world. Bearing in mind this is a CPU that draws 250 watts under load. Less plastic, what have you. I agree with the environment aspects of it. Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. The issue I have to deal with is that people buying reviewers have a slightly warped view, because I mean, it's I deal in CPUs day in, day out. So if I held up 100 grand's worth of CPUs like this, like that, which I just happily have on top of my PC here, I get when I get sampled, these packaging comes in, and if you're wondering why I have all those CPUs, it's regression testing, and if you want benchmarks on those, they're all in AnandTech's benchmark database. But so I see that packaging when I get the sample, if they send me a retail sample. I've had the Threadripper packaging, I've had the other Intel ball packaging. It's someone like me, the packaging isn't necessarily a fancy thing, right? It is what it is. But for somebody who's building a system once every 3 years, or if it's a streamer, a gamer, a content creator who buys a new machine every 3 to 5 years, they might decide to put the box in the background. It's a tangible extra to their system, and sometimes they bundle free things with it, or you might get the Avengers one. So all this vitriol about having fancy packaging, I don't get. I get why reviewers hate it. I get why the tech press hate it. I don't get why, I don't. When I see an article like that, I think the tech press, the person who's writing it is thinking more about themselves than they are the actual customers. And that's actually sad from a journalist point of view. But that's my opinion. However relevant is that? How is it that both Intel and AMD have allowed NVIDIA to eat their lunch, RE, matrix math, and machine learning? 12 years of CUDA helps. I mean, when I did my PhD, it was CUDA 2.0. We're now on CUDA 10.0. Maybe we're on 11 now. It's years and years of being embedded at the... So when I did my first CUDA, I went to a week-long course at the university, which was the first course the university ever done, with an NVIDIA fellow who was also a professor in financial mathematics. He did the course. It was a very rough course. It was a free course because it was the first time it had ever been done. And it was really good, and that started me on the path of GPU programming. But NVIDIA's been doing this, for over a decade now. So everybody has grown up on CUDA on that, so they know how it works. It's easier to program than AVX512, a lot easier to program than AVX512. It's a separate co-processor, so you're not taking away performance from the CPU on the GPU side. Again, it's just the configurability. AMD weren't in a financial position to be able to put that level of investment into the ecosystem at the university level. Just base teaching people how to program in was it Metal and then OpenCL. OpenCL is still really difficult because it's not high level enough. Whereas with CUDA you can do CUDA or you can do PTX, and that's nice and low level. So Intel didn't have a GPU program at that point, not a proper one. I mean, they tried with the Xeon Phi, right? And there was a Xeon Phi user group, and then it turns out they just added the AVX512 units to their Xeons, and that was a better replacement for Xeon Phi than continuing down the Xeon Phi route. So that's why NVIDIA's, and it helped let those companies, NVIDIA's had their lunch. Intel is introducing advanced matrix extensions to Sapphire Rapids for AVX512. So they're moving along that route. But NVIDIA's had several generations of optimizing their matrix math ALUs. So that's why. But don't forget, a lot of machine learning is still done on CPUs just because they're the easiest to program. Intel and AMD both sell lots and lots and lots and lots of CPUs for machine learning. My chat keeps refreshing, so let's see where we are. Any suggestions for pre-built providers in Europe? I don't keep track of the pre-built market that often. I mean, some companies I work with, like Armari here, because they send me Threadripper Pro CPUs. Threadripper Pro motherboards. I mean, I've used a couple before I got into the whole tech space. That's what, my first PC I purchased pre-built, and the company was absolutely terrible. Looking back on it, it was an absolutely terrible design. And they're still going. Look, the ones that are professional and are willing, if they have a chat system and you can talk to them about building a good PC and what they're saying aligns with the research you do online, that's where the good pre-builts are. Or at least they're the ones that know what they're doing. I mean, I know Linus does that whole let's check the OEMs stuff. But that's obviously Canada and US centric. There probably needs to be a European version of that. I'm too poor to do that, and I'm a one-man operation where Linus has 30. Frosty asks, do you think Intel and AMD underestimated the threat of acceleration? NVIDIA is accelerating data center CPU tasks on their DPU Bluefield chips. making more modest ARM CPUs attractive. Don't forget, Bluefield was part of the Mellanox acquisition that were just rebranded as NVIDIA. Intel already knows about acceleration because they've already got quick assist technology for crypto offload in networking. That's already part of the enterprise chipset levels. You can also get quick assist add-in cards. Intel sells those as part of a solution for specific customers. Kind of the same way how NVIDIA does with Bluefield right now. Sorry, back to full screen. Underestimated the threat of acceleration. AMD more likely than Intel, but only because AMD is a smaller company and is essentially repositioning itself in the data center. Intel knows the data center inside and out. They have customers all over. They would have seen it, and that's why Quick Assist and things like that exist. And we don't know what custom silicon Intel does for customers. What about Imagination's IP for how they're doing chiplet GPU? You see any indications of AMD, NVIDIA, Intel going that route? So NVIDIA has already done a demo chip with multiple GPU chiplets. Let's see if I can bring that up here. Did I write about it? I don't think I did. Oh, yeah, it was in the hot chips. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so this is so this was a test chip done with a research institution. NVIDIA did with a multi-chip module. It's yeah. This is more for machine learning rather than graphics. I mean, yeah, programming elements. Again, the issue with chiplet GPUs is the paradigm. You have to solve the paradigm first, and I don't think anybody has. What's the contract situation with Global Foundries now? From Quingali. If I understand it correctly, they're in the last phase, and it might run out in 2024. I'm not the best person to ask for that. I'm under the impression that AMD has got plenty of products and plenty of low-end and the words legacy products like the G series SoCs. They go into vending machines and gambling machines in Vegas. I'm under the impression that they have enough legacy and low-end products to fulfill that wafer agreement to the end. Rich asks, can you interview people from AMD, Intel, NVIDIA about ray tracing and where it's headed, the advancements in the tech? The issue there is when you ask those companies about ray tracing, one, they talk about what they've already done. Two, they're bigging up how they've already done. And three, they always say it's a journey from here to complete and the best. NVIDIA will talk about accelerating ray tracing through AI, which I think is a great technology. The first time I saw it, I was like, yes, that's exactly where ray tracing is. So no, rather than so say you're an animator and you're ray tracing a scene, you don't need to ray trace everything. You ray trace 10% of it, and as it's being ray traced, you apply a trained AI algorithm to predict what the other pixel colors should be. So you reduce your render time by 90%. That's the problem with asking about ray tracing technology. Plus, I must also remind you, I'm a CPU guy. Even though I've programmed in GPUs, I do spend most of my time focusing on CPUs. Sorry. Henry Abanto, will Xilinx software engineering team help AMD close the gap on NVIDIA and their software value? Unclear at this point, just because I'm under the impression that AMD will let Xilinx just be Xilinx independently for a while, because the thing with Intel and Altera is Intel tried to integrate Altera too quickly, and then Altera kind of went, oh! So, yeah. Do you think RDNA will scale well all the way down to mobile phone chips like in Samsung's phones, or do you think it won't really be RDNA based? It's hard to say. I mean, there were some leaks about a Samsung chip with AMD graphics being really, really efficient on graphics, but that's a leak, and I'm not too worried about that. Let's see, I'm about 10 minutes behind in questions. Sorry. Let's see. Warehouse storage space is a real issue if you don't sell trays for system integrators. Yes, that's true. One of the issues with saying, well, why can't AMD order more wafers, is it still has to predict future demand. So if you have to spend 50 grand to hire out a warehouse facility for a month, maybe it's more than that, maybe it's 100 grand to store all your stock, and then security on top of that, it brings margins down. See, Gordon says, don't forget how packaging, how great they are for posing action figures on. Agreed. Let's see. CUDA's at 11.2 at the minute. Oh, look good. Up from CUDA 10. Gordon says the original Threadripper packaging kind of kicked it off. You pay $1,200 for a CPU. You want something to remember it by. Yep. Yeah, you don't have to spend $1,000 on a CPU and you get the same cardboard box as a $25 Celeron. I agree. And yeah, 4,094 pins on the Threadrippers. Speak out and remove all doubt. Referring TSMC, Intel could easily sign a 5-year deal to secure suppliers. Intel aren't catching up within 5 years and might need twice the silicon production requirements. I mean, yes, if TSMC are happy to ink a deal, essentially a wafer supply agreement, right? If Intel want to enter a wafer supply agreement with TSMC, sure, go ahead. And that's probably and with that, TSMC agrees to work with Intel and give them preferential treatment. In return, Intel has to buy X amount of wafers, and TSMC can build the capacity to do that. I mean, the rumors are that Intel's ordering 3nm capacity, which is probably time enough for if TSMC wanted to build a fab with Intel's money, they probably could. Scan and OCUK are pretty expensive. Scan, I think I still have the old free. I'm not sure if they do this anymore. They used to do a thing where if you had 25 posts in the Hexus.net forums, you got free shipping for Scan. I'm not sure if they still do that. If they do, have at it. I've used it a number of times. Do you think Apple's silicon teams can outpace Intel / AMD performance this year based on what you've seen with the M1? Yes, but Apple has the vertically integrated advantage. Plus, they don't sell the silicon to anyone else. Apple product's going to do Apple products. If you can't use an Apple product, then you can't buy an Apple product. Well, I mean, if you can't use it because your workflow doesn't use it, or your business can't use it, is there a crossover where you think, well, Apple might have so much more performance than Intel and AMD that you just migrate your workflow over and take the hit of 2 to 3 months of learning how to do it? Sure, there will be a crossover point for pretty much everyone. What is that crossover point? That depends on you. For me, it would take a long while, I think. I mean, don't get me wrong. It may be a case of I use it in the future. I might use an M1 for video editing, but that's all I use it for. What have you? So, so my worry is Intel is back to its old tricks of using its buying power to muscle out AMD once again if it buys out TLC capacity from under AMD. Well, I mean, like I say, if Intel wants to pen wafer supply agreement with TSMC. That's up to them. TSMC can set the price. If that muscles out AMD, then yes, that's a financial advantage. Don't forget Intel's 10 times number of employees. And I can't remember how much times in revenue. Intel makes more profit in a month, in a quarter, than AMD makes revenue in a year. So put that into perspective. And then, maybe Intel and Apple will fight over. TSMC would not risk their goodwill, though. They would if Intel signs a long-term wafer supply agreement. James asks, why is James asking me questions, mate? You used to work for AMD. You're a smart one. Can latency sensitive workloads translate to MCM chiplet processors? You're just asking me this question. I know, just because you want me to talk about it. But you know it. Latency sensitive workloads have problems with MCM and chiplet. It all comes down to how the chiplets are packaged. Because obviously different packaging technologies affect latencies. So in-package signaling and conversion is slower than interposer signaling, which is slower than stacking signaling, I imagine, which is slower than monolithic signaling. So yes, it's a trade-off, right? If you may have a latency workload on a single thread, but if you're scaling out to 100 threads, it may be more. The way GPUs hide latency sensitive is they have so many threads in flight, right? A standard NVIDIA Warp used to be 32 threads, then I think they went to 64 threads. Now I think they're back down to 32 threads, or 2 lots of 32 threads. So the way they hide their latency is by doing so many of these warps at once. So even though each individual action has a very long latency, because you need to do a million of them, you hide them by pipelining. Mango Man 667, isn't Samsung looking to scoop up Global Foundries? I'm not sure. I think that would be a good purchase personally. And I think I saw Mike Spencer in here. Is there a regular working hour these days? No. Big thanks to Mike Spencer, because he's top tier on my Patreon, and it has been for a couple of months. Thanks to Mike. Mike runs he's part of a laptop refurbishment business in the UK, and I think he's looking to get some ad spots in some future videos, and he's investing early into the channel. So big thanks to him and company. I'm sure he'll tell me his company name, but hopefully, something like that goes towards getting you a better camera. Unfortunately, I'm on my Logitech C920 right now. Rich says on the wafer supply agreement, I think in 2018, 2019, they played Global Foundries to accelerate their wafer supply agreement. It was supposed to end in 2023. Next 2 years are around 100 million a year versus $1 billion 2 years ago. Yeah, I think I remember seeing something like that. Like I say, they're in the last stages of their supply agreement. I know Mango Man says, I know Global Foundries is trying to get rid of its East Fishkill plant, hemorrhaging billions a year. Isn't East Fishkill the R&D center? Because that's the old IBM R&D that came over in the IBM agreement. I think that had had a very basic EUV machine as part of Global Foundries EUV development. So the fact that Global Foundries isn't on leading edge anymore, probably means that sort of plant is probably good. Is Global Foundries doing any research on process nodes at all these days? Yes. So everybody knows about FinFET transistors, and before FinFETs we had planars. Global Foundries has a very cost-effective 22 nanometer planar process node, and they've been developing for the past 3 years an effective 12 nanometer planar process node called 12FDX. And it does some funky things to mitigate the fact that it's still planar, like body bias voltaging to get high performance, but it's also super low power. They designed it to be low power for embedded applications. They've been teasing that for 3 years. I think they finally said that it's almost ready to go sometime this year. Yeah, but I should spend more. I used to spend a lot more attention on. Oh, I just realized. Sorry, I still have the MCM up. I should spend more attention to Global Foundries of late. Let's see. I'm slowly catching up. I've been online for 2 hours 45 minutes now. Do you prefer air or water for your personal build from Overlord Actual? So my current system here is the i7 6950X, AMD's most expensive, Intel's most expensive high-end desktop CPU, $2,000. And it is currently on its third liquid cooler, and this one is giving up the ghost already. My next build will be air. It's been my system for 4 years now, so I've been using early first, second gen CLCs. My first one got a tear in the pipe to the point where, all the liquid just evaporated away over time. This one, I know it runs hot because it gets a lot of hot air. So not only do I need a more efficient CPU in here, I need cooling, and I'm getting on really well with Noctua these days. Noctua's been really helpful. They sample so many of our coolers for the high-end testing, high-end AMD testing, server testing. I think my next build, I'm going to splash out and get Noctua. Oli Yeno says, admittedly, you are a looker, but I think most of us are here for the audio. So I have a funky idea to do some tech ASMR. Do you really want to hear my voice do some ASMR about technology? Similar sort of thing, but not answering questions, just reading spec sheets in a very nice British voice. How does that sound? Would you like your Core i9 11900K with 8 cores and 16 threads? That's the sort of thing I want to do. I just need to get around to record it. Ask Sony to sponsor the Sony Alpha 1 8K 30 FPS mirrorless camera for the channel. Love to. Know crap all about cameras, so I wouldn't be doing it justice. Plus, I'm still small time. Is there much advantage for a Zen 4 die being on 7nm versus Global Foundries 12 or 14? 1, it depends what's in it. 2, it depends how optimized it is. So you would expect lower power. So the AMD has to move PCIe 4 in its memory controllers to 7nm. Arguably, it already has with its memory controllers because of Renoir. It would be smaller die. The only issue is obviously making sure you have the right supply. Because if you suddenly add another product onto your 7nm portfolio. But standard thing, the whole idea about the IO dies is that I think the imagining was that they could have multiple IO die, and AMD could chop and change based on what worked in the market. So you might have an IO die with a matrix accelerator, or the whole thing about the IO die was that's so massive. Why isn't there an L4 cache inside? Well, maybe there's a stacked L4 cache in the future, that sort of thing. So maybe you still have the SoC based on 14nm, but you have it stacked. So the one above it is just SRAM. That would be nice. And as James says, yes, time for a nice giant Pro Siphon. The CEO did send me one. It's in a box. Unfortunately, I still haven't had time to take it out yet. Sorry, James. You done wasted your money, didn't you? on the 6950X. Confession, it's my old review sample. I did a thing about sampling in my long how tech media interacts with businesses, and part of that was dealing with long-term loans and regression testing. So I still take the 6950X out every time I have to redo high-end desktop, but that's still on long-term loan. Barney Elliott says Zen 3 Threadripper with Ice Giant thermosiphon perhaps. I'm torn. Maybe I should go Threadripper Pro, because that has all the PCIe lanes, but I kind of want Ryzen 5000 single-threaded performance. Which would you have? Would you have... and I guess also I don't want it to be too powerful, because, I mean, 280 watts is still 280 watts. You still have to get rid of it. And I don't really want my office... In the summer here, it was getting a bit toasty, so... Olo says, just become a VTuber. Unfortunately, I have a mortgage. And then, my God, more ASMR. Somebody saying yes, somebody saying no. If you are going to upgrade your PC today, what would you choose, either for productivity or gaming? Cost no object to make it fun. So, I mean, my current system here, like I say, 6950X, it's running a GTX 1060. It's got a U.2, 1.2 terabyte drive, and 64 gigs of memory. The only thing I'm really missing is single core performance and efficiency, keeping those thermals down. It's the CPU side I want to do, so. Let's see. Johnny says, do Austin Powers voice. Do I make you Randy, baby? Yeah. Actually, no, that was terrible. Sorry, it's almost 1:30. I'm a bit tired. Have I ever played around with 3M Novak fluid for cooling? I haven't, but I've reported on it a lot, and I saw it 10 years ago when it was new. And lots of servers do it, and lots of server companies built around do it, and it's totally fun. But the infrastructure needed is a bit more work than I'm prepared to do. Regarding custom water cooling, so because I review hardware for a living, I probably spend less time fiddling with my PC than most. I want something that's stable. I run it at stock. My memory's at JDEC. I haven't been in and cleaned the system in over 18 months. I just need something that works. I'm not looking for something bleeding edge. I've done the whole bleeding edge gamer thing. That was during my university years. I've done the whole extreme overclocking thing. Yeah, I just want stability. And not having to deal with leaks, not having to deal with top-ups, not having to deal with air bubbles. I just don't want the hassle. When is the single core performance of Ryzen 5000 useful? So I'm one of these people that has lots of windows open, and I keep them open. Windows also has a multiple desktop feature. So I have, my desktop 1 is my casual stuff. My desktop 2 is my work. My desktop 3 is my video editing. My desktop 4 is my Steam. So I have lots of stuff running, and I'm constantly switching between the two. I mean, don't get me wrong, 16950X is fast enough for switching between everything. I just know, maybe it could be faster. Oh, I mean, so I'm actually using two monitors right now. I'm sure you can see me flicking between the two. I don't know how anybody can do this streaming with one monitor. They're both 1080p IPS panels, because all my 4K displays are being used for testing. It's not. Maybe I can. There's 3 4K displays up there, and the 2 behind me. That one's still running Crisis. They're 4K, but I don't actually use 4K myself. I really want a good pair of 16:10 monitors. Though that being said, because I have so many monitors, if I buy new ones, I have to get rid of the old ones or wait until they break. So, Let's see, I'm coming to the end now. Any final questions? Because we're almost at 3 hours. I appreciate everyone who's stayed for a long time. We've currently got 172 concurrent viewers. Thank you for everyone who's stayed this long. Thank you for everyone who's decided to jump in. Really appreciate it. And a big thanks to all the super chats. You know I love you all. I really do. This YouTube stuff is fun. Don't get me wrong. I wish I did more videos. It does get my anxiety up sometimes. Just it's I do have some so interesting projects coming up. I really want to do a video about Threadripper Pro, actually testing the CPU. Again, it's just getting the time to do it. That system there, the dual-core Jaguar, it's funny because I think it's the slowest CPU that has a PCIe slot, and that's actually an engineering sample board. I don't think it ever made it to retail. So I want to do some testing on that to see, how fast the fastest GPU can go with the slowest CPU. So things like that. Also, I've noticed Craft Computing, Jeff over there, he makes some comments about very slow Cinebench scores. I think I have him beat on that. I want to do a video around that. So, Mango Man 667, do you have a favorite advanced process technology? One that hasn't been made to market yet. Check the TSMC wafer on wafer stacking. They did a demo of it. Maybe I can bring it up. It's see, it's this. So this is chip on wafer, and this is stacked dies where they've got 12 wafers stacked on top of each other, directly bonded. See here, I mean, this is a picture, but basically you have 3 silicon vias for 12 stacks of silicon. Productize it. That's fun. If Tremont continues on 30% gen over gen, do you think Tiger Lake will be beaten? From Rich. No, because Tiger Lake will be beaten eventually, 2040, whatever. Atom cadence is, I think, Intel are going for every 2 years. And they still have to deal with the fact that Atoms don't have any micro-op cache, and like I say, they're doing this dual 3-wide decoder thing. And then obviously the execution port layout is different. It's a different configuration for the sort of workloads that those sort of things do. So that sort of thing. Thank you all for saying thank you. Did you run Crysis CPU render on the Threadripper Pro? Yes, I did. Let me see if I can bring up my results here. Bench 2020 results. It's a very long spreadsheet. Let's see, AMD. So Threadripper Pro. So if you watch my Crysis CPU video, you know that Crysis CPU has 2 main limitations. You can only use 16 cores, so you can do 16 cores, 32 threads, or you can do 23 cores at 1 core per thread, 1 thread per core. So anything over 16 cores, pretty much all performs the same. If I look at my data, so Crysis at 320 by 200 at low resolution, CPU only renders at 28.5 frames per second. I think the winner there is actually the 10900K. 10900K does 35. 5950X does, where is it? okay, so 5950X is the winner. That does 36.8, but the 64 core Threadripper does 28.5, just because it's lower per core frequency. But yes, I have run it. Colt Marshmallow, what will happen to photonics on the computer die? So one of the videos that I've been wanting to make, again, time anxiety, what have you, is I spent half an hour actually getting a detailed look into Intel's silicon photonics and integrated photonics roadmap and designs as part of Intel Labs Day at the beginning of December. I never ended up writing anything about it. I never ended up, just doing a video on it. But it's basically describing that integrated photonics in the future is going to replace the first stage of that photonics is going to be for chip-to-chip communication in in server environments, like 2P CPU to CPU. But also you can do photonics from node to node. So the idea is that with the appropriate design, it also involves stacked silicon as well. So you could have a 2000 CPU all connected by silicon photonics. So that's it. Yeah. That's what will happen to photonics next. If I get around to doing it, I will. Yeah. I always wonder that whenever I record something, I always get in a rush to record it, and therefore I leave things out and it's not as optimal. And then I still don't know a lot about video editing, and I try my best and try and make my meme thumbnails. Overlord Actual asks, have you taken a look at the new console CPUs at all? I guess it's kind of difficult in a traditional sense, but still. If you go to an Antec, I have reviewed the Xbox One Durango APU that came in the Chewy Aero box. Actually, give me a second. So let's see here. Can't see myself. There we go. So this is the Xbox One APU, the Durango. This is, the 2.3 5 gigahertz. It's the A9 9820. This is the board if you buy it off AliExpress for about $100. This is the Chewy Aerobox mini PC that uses a different custom design. Like I say, full review on an Antec. I was going to do a video. I recorded something. I really didn't like it, and I just didn't have the patience, the wherewithal, or the support to actually do a proper one. So it's terrible, isn't it? Has all of its problems. The problem with doing a non-standard CPU GPU is drivers, graphics, support. I had games that didn't run because it just didn't recognize the GPU. The drivers, RX 350, you had to get a random somebody downloaded from a Japanese website, and you had to just download. At least with the Aerobox, Chewy actually put the right drivers in to begin with. You can't download the drivers from the Chewy website. So the Aerobox was less of a hassle than the AliExpress board. But as it pertains to modern CPU GPU, actually over in Antec, Brett Howes has done a good side-by-side frame rate analysis sort of thing. That's probably the best we can do for now. Please do the live streams more. I would. It's I'm in a house full of people at 1:30, so if they're not still awake, it's frustrating because they have jobs in the morning to go to. And finding the right time of day. I mean, yeah, it's probably okay for the US right now, but if I did it, say 5 p.m. UK, that's really early in the US, and I'm not sure it would align with the audience. I don't know what time of day works best for everybody. Please let me know. Would you be interested in doing a YouTube video about your doctorate? It has been on the cards because my doctorate was, well, at least my thesis defense was different to a lot of people's. in the sense that they didn't understand what my thesis was, so asked me to do a 30-minute slide presentation, literally just do a presentation. They asked for 30 minutes. I ended up doing one for 2 hours. And they asked me 3 questions to at the end, all of them really easy. So normally a thesis defense is expected to take anywhere from 2 to like 8 hours. And you do it, you have your thesis, you have an internal examiner who is usually in the same department as you, but may not be in the same field, and you have an external examiner who is in the same field. And they read through your thesis in advance. They come and they question you, for 2 to 8 hours. My thesis defense was 2.5 hours because it was 2 hours of me talking, them not understanding, and them asking really basic questions, and then minor typographical errors, and submit. I do want to do a video on that, as in go through the whole 2-hour presentation. Maybe I'll do that live stream style as well, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, I could speak for hours about the whole state of education and where I did to get where I am, that sort of thing. But then that's just me talking about me. That's a bit big-headed, isn't it? Quarky, do you use Linux for anything? I use WSL for a few of my benchmarks. And I have Linux. I have FreeNAS up here, which also runs a VM, an Ubuntu VM, which is also my Steam cache. So I don't have to keep downloading 100 gig every time I spin up a new system. So that's what I use Linux for. I'm not. The thing about Linux that bothers me is that if you want to do anything properly, you have to type in really long commands into the terminal. And I think I do too many errors for terminal. So if I get one thing off and it does it all wrong, especially if you do a big setup script and you mistake an L and put an M and it does it all wrong and there's no way to cancel it. But I have people that know how to. Well, I know people that use Linux. I probably should spend more time on it, but I don't. Let's see. Are there any foundries outside of the big 3 working towards 7nm or equivalent performance nodes? Yes, SMIC and UMC, maybe UMC, but SMIC certainly in China. So SMIC had an order for an EUV machine from ASML, and the SMIC was put under the export embargo with the US. You might say, well, ASML is a Dutch company. Well, one of their big factories for manufacturing is in Wilton, Connecticut. And in the same way that the US told TSMC to stop supplying Huawei, why is a US company telling a Taiwanese company to not sell to China? It's the same sort of thing. So they were plans to go to 7nm. I'm not sure what SMIC's plans are now. Because don't forget, China's doing the whole, we need to be self-reliant on semiconductors. So, Andrew Cruz, would you consider doing a video or video series on your academic career? Could do. At least tell us a bit about what you studied. Yeah, I can. There's video 101, 102, 103. You can't understand 3 unless you do 2, unless you do 1. Hi, Linus Potato. I'm baking a Linus Toasty right now in the Netherlands. I need to go to bed, thanks. Good night. Homemade hot sauce. I'm a big fan of hot sauce. Though I rephrase it, I'm a big fan of buffalo sauce. And they finally started selling Frank's Red Hot Buffalo sauce in the UK. And my wife gets annoyed because I keep buying bottles and bottles and bottles of it and not having any of the other sauces that I've opened, like mint sauce. Speak out or removed out. Thank you for your kind words. I'm one of the people in school that was very reluctant to say anything and very anxious. And it's only through being a journalist that I've learned how to be more aggressive with my confidence. That's why I can happily go into a briefing with 50 other journalists and act like the biggest backside in the room and ask all the really annoying questions, because that's what I'm there and that's my job, and that's where my confidence lies. Doing the more personal stuff is sometimes tricky. The anxiety comes in a bit. Domif, what is this stream about? January news, Intel, AMD. Gepstra asks, how old are you, if you don't mind? I'm sure I've said it before, but I'm going to ask people to put in the comments in the live chat exactly how old they think I am. And when I get to those numbers, I'll tell you. Let's see. Egg cartons on the wall. Gavin Bonshaw, I mentioned him about the Z590 motherboard overview. He actually got me a displate, and I'll go get it and show you, because it's great. He said he saw this and he thought it was perfect for the channel. Haters gonna hate, potatoes gonna potate. It's an old meme, but it checks out. Again, big thanks to Gavin. He got me one of the Zen 1 die, 8-core die. You'll see that in sometimes my videos in the bottom right hand corner. Can you see DIMMs getting dropped in favor of on-package memory and then superfast SSDs? No. Janos, good luck with your submission and Viva. For what it's worth, my PhD, I had 9 papers. Writing took me about 6 weeks. And what gave me confidence is that I knew more than my examiners. And also one of my examiners was a drunk. You always have to leave a couple of typos so they have something to pick on. I don't do typos intentionally. Promise. Anand was pretty open in memory about himself and talking about his background. I think a lot of viewers generally want to know about you, and you are seen as a successor. Well, thank you. I sometimes wish I had a better way with words than Anand. When I'm tired, it can be frustrating. Do you have a fiber network like Linus Tech Tips? No, I have a 10 gig network, though at the minute only one system is connected to it at actually 10 gig. It's up here. I picked up a 20. So I've done an article about this on Anantech. A Netgear 24 port switch, enterprise one, was mispriced on Amazon for £700 when really they retail for like 1,600 at the time. So I bought it. That was a special birthday and Christmas present. Let's see. Everything falling in the background behind me. You don't want to feel big-headed. Just get Wendell to have a conversation with you about the state of education. I like speaking with Wendell. Wendell's a smart dude. Any thoughts on consumer 10G base switches becoming more common? I see there's a few around now. I've been on at this for years. A Quantia had the potential to wrap the industry up, but just never bothered. Too many people see... too many OEMs see 10 gig as a enterprise premium that they can charge for. That's literally all it's been the whole while, and it's frustrating me. Hi Alex, thanks for joining. Okay, so let's see some of these age answers. 58, 35, 16. Do you really think I'm 16? Mind you, do you really think I'm 58? 37, 36, 37, 32, 33, 34, 38, 39, 35, 40. Yeah, nice one, flash photo. 31, 12, because you have no facial hair. I shave twice a week. Yeah, 35, 33, 27, 30, 33, 32, 42, 34. 18, season 3. 69, yes. 33, 41, 43. Is Baby Forever Young, 20. So, okay, my actual age is... This drum roll. 35. I was born in 1985. Was it 25th of September 1985, which is 3 squared, 5 squared, 7 squared plus 44 squared. Yeah. I'm a good nerd. Either 15 or 35. Barney? Yeah, 35. Yeah, no, so my PhD is very algorithmic, and I'm worried. Know your algorithms, know the limitations. Because my PhD was chemistry, computational chemistry, everything I did computationally had to be related to something real world. I had more problem with the real world stuff than I did the computational. Doctor equals 24 plus years plus work, so 33 to 35, yeah. Have you ever run FreeBSD? No. Ian, do you still have a wall of motherboards? Yes, I have one here and one there. Go to bed. Yes, I will. It's coming up to 1:45. Bowling for Soup. I wasn't really a fan of Bowling for Soup. Some 41, yes. I never went down that. I had a few friends that went down the pop punk route, Real Big Fish and Bowling for Soup and that. I never went that far because I went metal. Okay, last couple of questions, and then we'll tie up, I think. Where do you recommend to go for people to learn at a deep level about semiconductor technology? I really want to able to understand those papers. So on YouTube, there's a bunch of courses by Ona Mutlu. If you just search for Mutlu, M-U-T-L-U. I can't remember if those are hardware-based or software-based, but he puts all of his lectures online. That's a really good place to start. I haven't watched through all of them properly because of time. Yeah, but it's a good place to start. And then it's one of those things that work really best. Work best in a very educational type environment. Just curious, why does Memristor Tech seem to have stalled? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. DDR5 DRAM level ECC. So just to confirm, the ECC on DDR5 isn't proper ECC. Just to make it clear, it's chip level ECC. So within a chip, within one of the dies, you have ECC. But chip to chip you don't, and chip to CPU you don't. That requires additional ECC. So you'll see DDR5 non-ECC and DDR5 ECC. They have ECC on chip, which helps because of the density and potential error rates and the speed. But you won't have ECC to the CPU unless you actually have a full ECC path. So for all intents and purposes, it's base DDR5 is non-ECC. Hi, Machine Man. We plan on doing more tech videos now that Jim's gone. Hope you, yeah. So Adored TV, if you don't know, Jim decided that he had had enough of covering technology. He was fed up with all the fanboys. So he went and dived into a more sciencey, religion-y type channel, which I'd argue has even deeper fanboy issues. But on that side, you're arguing facts against people who believe things without the need for facts. So I'm glad that the Adored TV team, so that's Alex, Kurt. Sorry, it's late forgetting people's names, but yeah, if you can match Jim's style, I'd be very impressed. and you know if you ever need somebody to talk to, I'm here. What's my favorite hardware? I don't know. No, I think I like research rather than hardware. James, when did Jim leave? I think it was about 3 months ago. He decided to stop doing videos on his main channel, and he's just been taking some time out for himself in the way that Jim does. Funnily enough, he decided to leave just after we found a photo of Jim. If you want to see, let me know if you want to see Jim, a photo of Jim. No, actually, no. I'll need his permission to show it to you. But we found it. Thanks, Jake, for the $5. Do not fear the Linux. Those setup scripts are copy paste all the way down. Yes, that is arguably what worries me. Scripts, mind you, my scripts are copy paste for my automation. Why has Intel been stuck on 14 nanometers so long? Should have asked that 3 hours ago. Sorry. Flash Photo, will SATA be around for the seeable future? Yes. Mootlu Lectures, yes. And Jake Sanders, again, thank you for another $5. ECC handled by OS and ECC handled by platform. Is there a reason to want to know about corrected errors beyond academic interest? End users don't need to know. As long as it's silent, it works. Academics will need to know. HPC might need to know because system development and system scale out. I always say ECC is good if you think about errors in terms of errors per gigabyte per year. So if you have 1 error per gigabyte per year, and you have 128 gigabytes in your system, that means 3 errors, or about an error every 3 days. So, is Jim still in Sweden? Yes. Oof. Okay, I think I am going to end it there. I probably went on for about an hour and a half longer than I thought. Again, thank you all for watching. Yeah, let's do some more streams. Maybe I'll find a better time of day. Please let me know what time of day you think would be best, and yeah, we'll go from there. And yeah, keep reminding me to do all these to do all the videos I've promised to do. Things like the PhD stuff, the one electron transfer stuff, the silicon photonics. Yeah, long list. Bear that in mind. I guess before everybody just leaves, I am kind of looking for a designer to do logos and stuff, and maybe a proper intro. People have complained about my intro, so it is what it is. And also, to a certain extent, you know, I guess somebody who's more knowledgeable in video editing. I'm deciding how much I want to invest in, you know, video editing versus creation versus all this sort of stuff, because yeah, this is still a passion project for me, and it will be for the foreseeable future. I definitely understand that, and I'm reinvesting, you know, everything that comes in, you know, all the super chats. Thank you to all, and obviously thank you to the Patreons as well, and the Google AdSense is obviously a little bit extra on top, but yeah, all gets cycled in. But really looking forward to growing the channel. I think I do need a little bit of help on the way. So if any of you artists, video editors, please get in touch. Let me know. Excellent. Again, so I've been sorry. I'm looking at myself here because that's where the chat is, but I know the camera's there. Yeah. So again, thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. You know, the usual jazz. Patreon, Twitter, the whole 9 yards. Thank you for watching, and yeah, let's do some more Q&A. Yeah.